Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to P&R this evening. I'll just go through the usual preamble and then we'll get down to business. This is a public meeting. Members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay. To the agenda, agenda item 1, appointment of substitutes. Julian?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do have some substitutes. Tom Petruski is here for Elena Round, Jessie Jagger here for Mel Orcott, and Karen Lawrence substituting for Sarah Murray. And just to add, we've had apologies from Andy Roberts.
Many thanks. Thank you. And agenda item 2, declarations of interest, please. Stephen Hodgson.
Yes, I've got 3 relating to the grants. I'm a trustee of the Lippard Hub. I am an council appointee to the Worcester Arts Council, and if need be, I'm also an elected member of Warndon Parish Council.
Thank you. Noted. Anyone else? Adrian.
Same item.
Okay, thank you. And Jabba.
Chair of the Worcester Meadow, though it's not explicitly mentioned.
Okay, many thanks. Is that everyone? Yeah, good. Public representation, Julian? None? Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, 23rd of May of this year. I'll just go through them by page and then pause to collect any responses. Page 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Anything there that anyone wishes to flag up at this moment? Okay, good, thank you. To the agenda item 5, Income Management Subcommittee. Anyone, colleagues present who was present on that particular evening wishes to add anything to the minutes? No, thank you. And the same for Personnel and General Purposes Committee. Anything there that you wish to speak about at this moment? No, thanks very much. So, to business, agenda item 7, Future High Street Fund, Scala and Corn Exchange. David?
Yeah, can you bear with me a second? I just need to open my file.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So I do intend to run through the background of where we've got, of how we've got to where we are now, because there are many new faces around the table. So I think it's important to set out the background to this report. So if I may start at the beginning, as they say. So in 2018, the government launched the Future High Streets Fund with the aim of renewing and reshaping town centres. And in June 2020, Worcester City Council submitted a detailed business case seeking funding to transform the north of the city around Angel Place into a diverse leisure, cultural and entertainment and residential quarter. Excuse me. I think it's important to note at this stage that the original application had significant support from the local community. We had letters of support from Lord Faulkner as a trustee and a board member of Worcester Theatres. We even managed through the board members of Worcester Theatres to obtain a letter of support from Imelda Staunton, CBE, who is a patron of Worcester Theatre. We also had Robin Walker provide letter of support, Mark Stansfield, the chair of the LEP, and not last but not least, Professor David Green from the university also provided support. So the original proposal that was successful was for £17.9 million, and you'll see in paragraph 2.3 there were a number of interventions, including tonight's subject, the Scala Corn Exchange, 8 Angel Street, which is the supermarket opposite the Scala, ironically the site of the previous theatre that was demolished in 1960. Oh well. The former Panama Jacks building, we had a vacant premises and property enhancement scheme, which is currently going very well, has been reported to members, improving retail and upper floors on Angel Street in the main. The enhancement to Angel Place, the redevelopment of Trinity House with residential units, and the public realm improvement, which most of you will see is ongoing at the moment, and we talked about that last night at committee. So following the award of the funding, we went through an extensive due diligence and feasibility study, and we looked at the various options that were available to us. And through that process, in paragraph 2.4, you'll see that we ended up reallocating money from some of those other areas of the programme to the Scala Corn Exchange project. There were a number of reasons behind that. So first of all, the former Panama Jacks building, when we approached the owner of the then empty building, the owner said that he was in the process of letting that building and therefore didn't need our intervention. That building was subsequently let and is now occupied. I think from my perspective, that's the perfect public sector intervention. We threatened intervention, the private sector paid for the development, and we saved the money. And so the department allowed us to reallocate the money from Panama Jacks into the Scala project. And then the final one on that list where we reallocated funding was Trinity House. We tried very, very hard to reach an agreement with the landlord in terms of evaluation. Unfortunately, the landlord's view of the value of the property was very significantly different to ours. And of course, we appointed a property agent and got a professional valuation, but unfortunately, we couldn't get anywhere near agreement. An option would have been a rather long and drawn-out CPO process, which is very expensive and very time-consuming, and so we determined not to proceed with Trinity House. I must say at this stage that despite some initial misgivings over the process, the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities proved to be very helpful and did allow us to move those other projects' fundings into this project to close the early funding gap. And so if I now move on to section 3, first of all, I think it's important to point out that all of the work that we have funded to this date has been funded through the Future High Streets Fund programme. There has been no allocation of City Council resources. Paragraph 3.2, obviously the original application was done at some speed in order to meet the submission deadlines. So the first thing we did was to commission a feasibility study with a company called Theatre Plan, who did some work to determine whether the two buildings were viable as a arts centre and theatre with a 500-seat auditorium. As the report goes on to say, the study considered space requirements, including main auditorium, supporting studio theatre, front and back of house facilities, and many other elements. The study identified a number of design options for the building, concluding that the accommodation had significant potential to create a new, thriving performance venue. The key design principles included locating the new main auditorium in the Scala building, that's the 500-seat auditorium, and locating a studio theatre in the upper floor of the Corn Exchange. That was not part of the original proposal. It was not part of the original funded application. The opportunity for the studio theatre emerged from the work that Theatre Plan did when they examined the premises and determined what the potential was. It was recommended that the Corn Exchange should provide 2 stories of internal accommodation, providing spacious rooms with ancillary uses, as reported here. I'll just move on slightly from the report to note that spatial options plan was presented to members, to the member reference group on the 10th of October, before we moved on further. So that was that piece of work there where we determined really the initial feasibility of the project. In March 22, the council appointed a multidisciplinary team. So based on the work of Theatre Plan in determining that the building was suitable for the proposition that we had made, we appointed architects, specialist theatre consultants, Theatre Plan and Equals, who are our cost consulting and QS consultants. So moving on, paragraph 3.8 sets out the design that the architects then proceeded to work on. And we got to RIBA Stage 2 concept in response to comments made by stakeholders. There was a key stakeholder event in July 2022. And as a result of that feedback, we introduced a flexible stage, more dressing rooms, increased crossover at the back of the stage, and an orchestra pit. And some of you will remember the discussions that we had at the time with regard to that stakeholder feedback. So moving on, the resultant cost plan, as it says here, paragraph 310, far exceeded our project budget. In recognition of the importance of the arts venue to the regeneration of the city, it was concluded that the project outputs needed to be revised to ensure cost savings could be identified from the stage 2 options. At this point, we then reviewed the proposals and agreed that we would need to make significant changes to deliver something closer to the budget. So paragraph 312 sets out the preferred design and engineering options that were developed for RIBA Stage 3. So moving on to paragraph 313, I've got a correction at this point. I've been through the previous committee reports, and the December 22 report, it says here, identified a gap of 1.3 to 1.5. That's not correct. The December 22 report actually identified a gap of £500,000 on the construction phase, plus 350,000, because at that time we had had a further meeting with stakeholders in September 2022 and discussed options for the Swan Theatre, which could potentially forego a £350,000 capital receipt for the city. So that increased the deficit to 850k at the point of the December 22 report. Now, the reason why it says here 1.3 to 1.5, I've just been speaking to the programme manager, and the actual stage 3 cost plan was only issued on the 9th of December 2022, which would have been just after this report was published. So it was at the, it is correct to say at the stage 3 cost plan production point, the gap increased to 1.3 to 1.5, but that's not as stated in this report and is stated in the December report. So the December 22 report to committee resolved to remove the studio theatre, to create a wedge block behind the toilet block to provide back of house facilities, to submit a revised planning application with the removal of those additional facilities, and to note the additional funding gap. And that report included key drawings, architect's drawings that were shared with stakeholders in the November of that year prior to the committee meeting, and those revised proposals were well received by stakeholders in the November 23. If I move on, so once we got to that point, detailed design continued to move towards stage 4, and the members, as noted previously, agreed for us to proceed with the plan application and to appoint construction consultants. And it's at this point really where things became incredibly difficult. Although our cost consultants, our QS, had suggested a gap of possibly 1.5, when we met with our preferred bidders for the construction project, their estimates of the cost added an additional £2 million to the project, bringing the total deficit, as shown in paragraph 4.2, to 3.5 million. Also, our cost consultants had estimated a 12-month programme for construction, and our preferred bidders, construction partners, were estimating 2 years construction. So that at that point produced significant issues for us. The gap was getting bigger rather than smaller, and the timescale was extending rather than shortening in any shape or form. In addition to that, there were other matters arising, and those are referenced in paragraphs 4.4. Archaeological investigations identified significant deposits within the ground that could result in piling foundations not being acceptable and other delays to the project. We also had a deadline of March 2024 for completion with the government funding, and so unless we could bring down the timescale of 2 years significantly, we were way outside any government agreed timescale. We were talking to the government about an extension of 6 months, and we thought that that was going to be feasible, but it would appear that at that time that 12 months plus was going to be out of the question. So that was a concern for us. The other two elements noted here is that given the historic fabric of the buildings, it wouldn't be unusual for design costs to increase again when we reached final stage. And so we were expecting that they were going to go up again at some point, and we also now discovered that there was an issue around power provision, and discussions would have to take place with National Grid about providing additional power sources, which again would add to the cost. The final comment I'd make on this section is paragraph 4.7. We began work with Worcester Theatres on the production of a business plan. That first draft business plan identified significant funding gaps over and above what the council had previously provided to Worcester Theatres in terms of an ongoing grant, and it would be necessary to revise that plan to bring those costs down or find alternative sources of income over and above the city council grant. As we stand here now, that work was ongoing, so that hadn't been completed. So a viable business plan was still an issue. Members may recall that when we set out the way forward in the previous reports, we said to members that we would only proceed with on the basis that we met a number of requirements. So the first of those requirements was an approved planning application. The second of those requirements was a viable business plan. And the third of those requirements was a viable construction plan that could be delivered within budget. So you can see at this stage, we were not able to meet those requirements and proceed. So at that point, we've taken the decision to pause the project and look for alternative ways forward. Some work has been undertaken in terms of what the buildings could be used for, and we believe that the only viable option remains to be an arts venue of some shape or form. The buildings do not lend themselves to residential development. You know, there are no windows in the buildings. The windows, if anything, would just be on the outside. Residential or office development would be very difficult and probably even more expensive than what we're considering here. So residential and office development were not considered to be viable. Likewise, retail development in the main auditorium would be a very, very difficult proposition. So our preferred option is to look to determine what can we deliver as a arts venue, and to do that we need to do some continuing work with the architects to get a better idea of the cost plan. If I just move on through the report, past the alternative options, if I may, I'm happy to take questions after that. So if you move on to section 7, implications, you'll see there the original budget that was set out. You'll see the current budget projections, and you'll see the approximate spend to date in each of those areas. I think it's important to make the note that if you move down to paragraph 7.2, you will see that we still have 7 million uncommitted funding, which can go towards the construction project. So we still have a substantial amount of funding available for the construction phase. We have not yet got any approval, of course, from the department to move forward with these alternative schemes, and that's something that we would seek to gain approval for, subject to member agreement this evening. Just moving further through the report, as it says under legal and governance implications, the funding is approved and funded through the government's Future High Street Fund. any material variations will require formal approval from the department. One of the things we've had to do previously is to demonstrate that the project still provides value for money in terms of a cost-benefit analysis, which we've been able to do, hence the department's allowance of moving the money around. There still are a number of risks was set out in the report. And I would suggest that the Future High Streets Fund programme remains a priority for us, and it supports the delivery of the regeneration of this part of the city, which still remains a very important outcome for us. I'll stop at this point. That's a bit of a quick whiz through a long programme that's been going for a couple of years now. I'm happy to take questions, or Sian and Shane are here, and between the three of us, we probably could cover most points if people want to raise any. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. I will take, obviously, questions. Lynn first, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's really helpful to go through the history, because I'm also really conscious that, in fact, the sort of council leadership in terms of elected members at the beginning of this project, there's virtually none of them still around. So the sort of folk memory or the history of it is limited. So, a number of us only became involved part the way through the project. So I think setting out the history is really helpful. I think it was a huge shock, I guess, that, as a senior leadership team was coming in as leadership of the council, when it was said that, when we were told that the financial gap for this project is basically is too wide to breach, too wide to deliver, which, is a huge concern. I don't know about anybody else. It's certainly, I had a number of sleepless nights as to where we go with this. Worcester City was incredibly lucky. We have got the funding, we have got government investment within the city. So it's really important that we work out how we make best use of that funding and best use of it given where we're now placed. I know that there are other local authorities that, due to increasing costs and other issues, are struggling to deliver on some equivalent projects. I don't think within Worcester we want to give up on this, but it's about finding the right thing and the right way forward. Since this information has kind of come out into the public domain, there's been had quite a lot of contact, there's been a lot of conversation, and actually I think quite a lot of people within Worcester residents and members of the art scene were concerned about this project. People don't always speak up, but I think there was limited involvement of some people, or a perception that was the case. And when you come into observing something part the way through, you don't know all the sort of parameters and details around it, and it kind of feels as though during this history, there've been a number of compromises down the line, and it's actually quite brave and quite difficult to say we've got to a point with trying to put a 500-seat theatre into the Scala. Actually, that's a compromise too far. So there's been a number of difficulties with the project, or compromises along the line. I think it's really important that we focus on where we are, the solutions, the doable going forwards. And to me, I think that the key to that, to actually question out what is the place of this venue within the Worcester art scene? And the two buildings, I mean, a number of us were privileged to be shown round. So the Scala building and the Corn Exchange next door are amazing buildings, even as they are. So Shipley's just kind of inhabited a sort of a box inside Scala Cinema, you know, and the back wall and the reach of the cinema is just an amazing space, and the little bow windows for the shops that opened into Crown Passage, for those of us that remember that. And, you know, what was the Ask restaurant is a lovely open space with sort of 2 mezzanine levels. Yes, it needs refurbishment, but I think within those spaces, a wonderful thing could be created, and those, no, they deserve to be fully utilised and occupied. So I'm very much in favour. I think it's really important, you know, the recommendation that we have here about a process of consultation and engagement with all stakeholders. And when you start to think of, and it's the creative arts community, it's the people within Worcester. And I kind of idly started over the weekend and then kind of ran away with a list of, the number of different arts organisations and sort of small groups that there are within the city. You know, there's the various sort of dance schools. Worcester Bid has an interest, you know, 7 Arts. And because as a county captain, and I've had some contacts since, so there are people living within the city, and that was one of the things with the Rising Festival. There are people living in the city who are involved in the creative arts, but who work out of town. And actually, it's because the right facilities or the right network hasn't found itself. Those people, it could be really amazing to have them working in the city, and without assuming the answer that, oh, it's a 500-seat theatre, or necessarily that it's a 300-seat theatre. So it is about finding a way forward from where we are and utilising the money that we still have to actually achieve the best result that we can, and to have a venue that will be appreciated by the city and will have an audience and will have a life. I think it's important that that sort of consultation and engagement process is as open as possible. It needs to be done very quickly because the clock is ticking on the end of the project, which is why I suggest that we do kind of amend 1.32 to actually put independent consultation in it. I'm afraid I haven't got the words in front of me, but Sian will be able to read it out. John?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, the proposal from Councillor Denham was at 1.3 Roman numeral 2, commence a process of, and then add the words independently led consultation and engagement.
Okay, and did you want to speak to the other part of the amendment as well, the review? Is that part of that?
If I may, Chair.
Yeah, please do, yes.
So also a suggestion, you know, having thought a great deal about this whole project since the problem was first raised with us. I think it is important that we do take undertake some sort of review to look at, you know, how we got to this place and how the money that has been spent, and, you know, being conscious of so under 7.1, you know, the original budget for the Scala and the Corn Exchange, that's almost a doubling as to what the costs are now for that element of it. And the risks, and you know, as to what was the original proposal, exactly what that was, whether it was realistic, can you get a theatre into a cinema? I think we do need to ask some of those questions and understand how we've got to this point in time and how to make absolutely sure that we go forward and learn those lessons towards delivery. And I think if we can do that in a structured way, rather than do too much of that this evening, that to me seems the most productive way forward. So Sian does the constitution, so she knows how to word these things properly.
Through you, Chair. So Councillor Denham's additional recommendation would sit under 1.3 as a new Roman numeral 1.4. So in other words, the clause would be authorises officers with the oversight of the major programmes member reference group to undertake the following actions. And the fourth would be undertake a review into the development of the project to date in order to take lessons learned which can inform the future direction of the project.
Well, we have a proposal. We need a seconder, Marjorie. And on that basis, does anybody want to comment at this moment on specifically on Lynn's amendment? Karen.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I really support the amendments because I'm obviously new to the committee. And one thing that struck me was the original budget being 6.5 million, but we've already spent 4, which to me makes it look like the original budget was completely wrong. Particularly somebody not noticing that we'd need, you know, a new national grid infrastructure is quite an important construction in my world, in the construction world, would be seen as a grave error. But it's also that, you know, you've got some uncommitted funding, and obviously it's about spending it extremely wisely. And obviously, when we're doing these kinds of projects in the construction industry, there is a huge variation when you're on site as well. So it's having the capacity that you've got a potential extra spend appearing when you're on site. And of course, we have the buoyancy of the construction industry as well. I've heard of many contractors in the past months going bust. The materials are more tricky as well. So actually, even if we get this project on budget, unless we've got a cushion, the other problem is I wanted to ask you about this March 2024, because there is no way we're going to get this finished by March 2024. So unless we can get approval from the government to have the money spent after that, what are we going to do? Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks, Karen. A couple of points. The construction issues are, as Lynn says, you know, nationwide. One of the problems is that, and this is, hindsight's a wonderful thing, you know. One of the problems is that the way the government has funded these various schemes, every successful applicant in the country is chasing the same timetable. So we're all going out to appoint contractors with the same deadlines. And your point about contractors going bust is a very valid one, because through the process, we've been told that there were other contractors interested in this, but they were not willing to expand their business to accommodate it. They were already committed, and it was too much of a risk for them to expand their business to accommodate a project like this if there was a risk to the delivery, which meant they'd overstretched. and then they couldn't, they couldn't deliver. So there's that issue. And then there's also the issue that, everybody in the country has got to finish this by March 24. And so trying to find a contractor that's not already committed somewhere else is a real challenge. I was expecting, and I haven't seen anything yet, I was expecting to see some sort of announcement from the department that the programme nationally was going to be extended, not just a reference to our project, but the whole programme, because the whole programme is facing these issues, as Lynn says. I haven't seen anything yet, but you're absolutely right. The absolute minimum we would need would be an extra 6 months. And the difference is spending the money and opening the venue are slightly different. It's about spending the money. So there is some wiggle room, but it's, as Lynn said, one of the reasons why we've talked about in the recommendations is to continue with ongoing dialogue with the department, is because if we were to pause now, the chances of us being able to build anything in the remaining period of time, if we didn't start until, where are we now? Start till Christmas, for example, it would be great. We just wouldn't have time. The clock was ticking very fast a few months ago. It seems to be accelerating every day at the moment. Your points are well made. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just clarify something in relation to the recommendations, just to try and give you some reassurance on that? The council is currently negotiating with a construction contractor. We're not in contract with them yet. And we have said very explicitly in the recommendations in the report that a decision to let the construction contract and to commit the council to that expenditure would need to be made by this committee, hence the reference to a further report in October. Because if we need, there's an ongoing level of dialogue with the department that is common to all projects we are understanding nationally, but we're going to need very clear approval from government before we enter the construction contract. I just wanted to reassure you on that.
Thanks very much, Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I think Lynn has very well summarised the position that we're at the moment, and I support her amendments. I'd just like to raise two further points. First of all, when we thought we had a funding gap of £850,000, we thought we could plug that gap by various methods, including going to wealthy benefactors and that kind of thing. And I hope that we will still pursue those options because every little helps, especially in a situation like this. And the other thing is that in connection with with talking to the arts community in the city, I think we have to consider this new venue alongside our existing venues. And I understand that when this project started, the idea was that the Swan would relocate to the new venue. But at the Swan at the moment, they have a 500-seater, and therefore they're going to have to continue putting on those shows. They will stay at the Swan, which then implies that maybe they won't be so interested in our venue because they'll still be running the Swan. And we also have to consider the fact that a 300-seater auditorium is about the same size as Huntingdon Hall. So is there enough going on in Worcester to fill these two venues? Yes.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just to confirm, yes, there are a number of outstanding applications for funding, but of course we've had to pause those at the moment because the application that we were in the process of making was for a different outcome. But we will, subject to member agreement, then look to pursue those opportunities as best we can. With regard to the Swan, the Swan is 325 or something in terms of seating, and I've met with Muff and I've spoken with Sarah Jane, and yes, this would this, whatever we do here is now going to sit alongside the Swan. It's not going to be a replacement for the Swan in any shape or form, I would imagine. We are not going to build a theatre per se of 325 seats to compete with that. But of course, subject again to member agreement, that all remains to come out in the wash once we go through the consultation, and I wouldn't want to try to prejudge the outcome of what stakeholders might feel is the best use of the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think Lynn perfectly summed up the situation where we are now with it, and the recommendations before you are after careful consideration of the position that we find ourselves in. I mean, I don't think it's a case of where we are, but a case of how we got where we are. And for risk of a full post-mortem this evening, I just wanted to highlight a number of points in terms of that. I think it's really important to highlight that the original vision that everyone was sold, including the key partners that we brought on in the early stages, was nowhere near going to be achievable. And just having a sense check of and reality of what we were trying to achieve in the space that we had, you know, square peg and round hole comes to mind consistently throughout this process. It was never really meant to be, and why we didn't really pick up on that. But I'm sure that the recommendation that we've got in there will uncover some of those truths. In terms of the financial situation, obviously that has developed as we've got on. The concept is really important that we understand why this original concept was sold to us as it was in terms of that, and that actually at every opportunity when in terms of oversight and decision making process, that it was always top down rather than bottom up, and that's what we've tried to address here today, to ensure that the City of Worcester and the arts community get a facility that is going to be usable by them. And it's also important to realise that actually whatever plans that we do come up with in consultation with the arts community have to be able to wash their face, that a business proposal has to come in that would be ensure the viability of anything that goes in there. This is not a free space that we are going to be letting out to the arts community. It has to be in line with what we want to achieve in terms of our current financial position and our budget position, and how we envisage this project going forward in terms of that. And the final point is obviously that there's a misconception, I think, and a lot of times when central government money gets handed out to local government, that it's we kind of have to we can afford to take the eye off the ball, and we can be a little bit more fast and loose. This is still public money that we're our custodians of, and we still have to be accountable for it. And that's why it is necessary that we do look deeper into this, and to ensure that we can satisfy ourselves and the general public that we have got fiscal responsibility of this and financial responsibility to understand where this money has actually gone and can justify that. Hence the recommendations that my colleague and I have come up with this evening.
Thank you. I've got Stephen and then Tom.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I am very disappointed with where we are now. I think, I'm a bit like somebody who was looking forward to having a high-speed railway station in Leeds, and then found out that the cost escalated so much, it ended up falling a few hundred miles short. And this is unfortunately what has actually happened here in terms of events and that. I think project management is something that it's a skill, and it is something that has to be, exercised well. And obviously, the more delay you put into the process, the more cost it does, and also the opportunities of getting the best contractors to build the thing diminish, as the managing director said. they start to get taken up by other authorities doing similar type projects. It's disappointing when you see somewhere like Prescott in Lancashire getting a fantastic like model of the Shakespeare Globe built in their town, and it had a really wow factor in that. And on the positive side, we did get government money, and we will end up with a nice art facility in that. But really, I've got two main questions. Have we factored in the fact that having a smaller venue means we won't be able to generate the same amount of revenue as we would in terms of building a larger theatre? I'm thinking a few years ago when this council decided not to go for a 6-lane, but to go for an 8-lane swimming pool, because although it was more expensive, it gave more opportunities in that. And are we thought of doing a similar thing in the theatre thing? Another project we had linked to the swimming pool, which was very badly managed, was the asbestos at the Samson Walk, which came at a shocking extra cost that we hadn't actually factored in. Are we confident that the building we are renovating for this doesn't have any nasty surprises like this, so that when we actually do build it, it will be at the cost that we have prone to said? And also, what is the actual cost of adding 200 seats to the actual structure? Is it really that surmountable thing? Is it just a question of, squeezing in, a few extra rows into the auditorium? Is that not actually possible? Because, sometimes you can take a little bit off a seat like that. You can make the seat slightly less loved, and you can actually get people in. I'm not saying we should squeeze people in like Ryanair, but I think we do need to, ask them to consider those sort of things as well.
In answer to your first question, have we factored in a reduction in potential revenue? Well, no, we haven't, because we haven't developed a business plan yet that will determine whether this is a viable project, as Councillor Riaz says, that will wash its face on an ongoing basis. So at this stage we are where we are, to use a hackneyed phrase. We have no business plan for an alternative venue in that respect. Could the building unearth some as yet unidentified costs? I will guarantee that it will. Within the budget that we had set aside, we had significant contingency, but without wishing to sound defensive, I don't think anybody could have identified the escalation in materials and building costs that we've all faced in the last 12 months. So we did have contingency, but it was unfortunately not sufficient. In answer to your last point, the 500-seat auditorium included 2 wraparound balconies at 2 levels in the building, which required significant work. As you can imagine, it needed lifts to give full disabled access to every floor. And so it wasn't as if the auditorium was at stalls level in its entirety. So taking out all of those additional seats, that there is significant cost involved in those seats. It's not simply, we haven't saved the cost of 200 chairs, if I can put it that way. There is very, very significant building cost that will need to come out. Having said that, I think as officers, and I'm sure members will agree, we want to do something that we can look at and be proud of what we've achieved. So we don't want to put smaller seats in and compromise it. And people will only come back if they have a good experience, whatever the type of venue. So I do think we need to deliver something that is fit for purpose, whatever purpose that might be. So no, I'm afraid we can't simply get back to 500 seats by taking the arms off some of the chairs, as it were. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Based on that, what I'd just say, when the redesign is considered, if there is a way of retrofitting a balcony in at a later stage, could that be considered in the actual plans? I know things like sports stadiums are being built where you can actually, add extra things in, which isn't which at a later date, which doesn't add to the cost in the same way as if you had to do it from scratch. I think that would be a very prudent thing to do.
Through your chair, when we decided that the Corwin Exchange building could not accommodate the 110-seat studio theatre, we did at that point look to see if we could work with the mezzanine levels so that at some point in the future that a new level could be put in and we could eventually accommodate a studio theatre in that space. But as I said earlier, that wasn't part of the original business submission. In all honesty, I'm no architect, and there's probably people in this room that would offer a better view of the situation than me. But I would imagine that the cost, if we can't afford it, if we can't afford to do it in one go, the cost of trying to do it in 2 or 3 stages would be absolutely prohibitive. So I think, sadly, whatever we end up with at this stage now is what we're going to have to live with for the foreseeable. I would hate to set any hairs running in terms of expectations that one day we could put new floors in and do all sorts of new things. Maybe if a future government comes along with some more money, we could do, but I don't think that's probably going to be a viable option. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I've got Tom and then Adrian and then Jesse.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start by clarifying before I sort of make up my mind and whether I'm ready or not ready to support the second amendment proposed by Councillor Denham about the scope of the lessons learned exercise. What do we have in mind? So that's my first question before I ask the question proper. Could perhaps monitoring officer or Lynn explain what's the purpose of it and what's the scope? Is it what are we hoping to get out of it?
I'll offer a view and then So thank you for the question, and it's a very interesting question in the context of what is the role of this committee and what is the role of the Audit and Governance Committee, for example. It's been framed in terms of undertake lessons learned which can inform the future direction of the project, because what we need to learn needs to be done in quick time in the same way as the consultation does. It would be about the commissioning process, use of consultants, scope of their brief, working to budgets, project management, all of those, I guess, strands or themes that perhaps you might anticipate, but with a view that it can inform the future direction of the project and therefore it will form part of what comes back to committee in October. There could thereafter be further lines of inquiry that this committee requests that Audit and Governance look at as a proper sort of deep dive into project management, as we did before on the swimming pool site.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Sean. I think I might be asking the question that lots of people out there are asking, what on earth have we spent £4 million on? Is that too simplistic? If you start reading the report, it's a catalogue of mishaps, perhaps incompetence. I'm really sorry, but it does look like that. To be surprised by archaeological findings in a medieval city with Roman history thrown into it I'll leave it without comment. The lack of consultation with the local we talked about this actually yesterday in the Place and Economic Development Committee, that the local stakeholders, and we can, you know, we can talk about the terminology here, stakeholders, people who represent community, who represent the arts community. How on earth we've got to this point, spending £4 million of public money without conducting independent and thorough consultation with the local art scene is beyond belief. That's why I'm asking about the scope and the consequences of the lessons learned exercise, inquiry. I'm not sure what we decide to call it, because to move forward, we have to have confidence that what is put in front of us is believable and trustworthy. And based on this, it's embarrassing. It really is.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think it's unfair to say that how did we get to this stage without any consultation and what happened in the project. I've got in front of me actually, because the programme manager sent it to me as a reminder, the options appraisal that Theatre Plan carried out for us. I mentioned that in the original submission, we had support from key stakeholders. So there was, within the timescales available, we did consult with a number of organisations, key organisations, including the Worcester Theatre, the university, the LEP. You know, there was support for the project at the initial stage, and that's detailed in the report. The next stage was then to test the feasibility of the space being able to accommodate what we had set out in the proposal. And of course, we have to realise when we submitted the proposal to build a 500-seat auditorium, some work was done, but not in any great detail. I don't think none of us, we've all been around long enough to know that there's going to be archaeology. We're not suggesting for 1 second we all threw our hands up in horror and said, what a surprise that was. I think the challenge is that the type of construction that the architects had come up with in terms of the piling of the new wedge then made that very difficult with the archaeology, which, and at the beginning of the project, you know, there was no concept of how the construction would be made, whether it would be piling, whatever. So, you know, we weren't to know at that stage whether piling was going to be the best solution. So we certainly didn't act in any surprised fashion when we found archaeology. You said that, you know, we to get to this stage without any consultation. Well, I've already mentioned the fact that the original submission had support from a number of key stakeholders. I think where it went wrong early on is what we waited to do was to get something that we could put in front of stakeholders before we went to the next stage. So we waited until we got to RIBA stage 2 before we could then go out and show stakeholders the proposal. And therefore whilst those designs were being prepared, there was a period of radio silence, if I can put it that way, which I think was you know, probably a mistake. But we did go out to stakeholders in the July. We did get some feedback in terms of they wanted changes to the stage, they wanted changes in terms of an orchestra pit, they wanted more dressing rooms, and they wanted increased and improved crossover behind the stage. So those were the things that we got in terms of feedback when we presented the original design, and that was in the July. The architects then responded to those that stakeholder feedback, and then, as I said, in the September, we went back out and presented to stakeholders, and these were events that were held at the Swan Theatre with an audience of stakeholders. So we did go back out, and then we presented to the stakeholders how would we responded to their feedback on the early design architect's drawings. And the feedback was positive. The stage had been changed, the crossover had put in place, we'd moved the floor so that we could put an orchestra pit in. We'd made various changes. And it was at that point then we presented to members, and we then put the application in. So we did do that work, and then we also had another stakeholder event in November, where the designs, the more detailed designs and the architect's drawings that you've seen, you know, the impressive drawings were presented, and the feedback was very positive. So I think it would be unfair to say that we've not consulted with stakeholders, but I do think, yes, early, between the original application and getting that approved and the subsequent, this is the draft design, there was a period of you know, no correspondence while we were waiting for the architects to produce something that we could go out and show to stakeholders. I think, you know, that's the process we've been through. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay.
I give way with pleasure, Lynn.
Thank you. I mean, just to kind of respond to it, I mean, there are absolutely legitimate questions, a number of legitimate questions. And the reason I suggested that to add that recommendation into the report, we have a very lengthy agenda tonight, and I don't think here and now is the place to undertake that review, when, if you like, you know, I was going to say, neither side is prepared. That's not quite the right language, but, you know, a review needs to be done, you know, in a structured way with, you know, a number of questions, and examine the history and the governance of the project and the decision making. And I don't think we can do that tonight and to do it justice. So the wording of the recommendation is to say, if everybody agrees, we agree a review is really important as to what's happened and where we are with the project. And so we can use that learning in a timely way to get delivery of the remainder of the project and the remainder of the funding.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very useful, Lynn. Thank you, because I think what I'm getting at here is I suppose the issue of trust. And as Vice Chair of the Audit and Governance, I would like to, in this case, let's take a step back. I'm not sort of attempting to inquire about the details of the project and the history of the project. What I am concerned about is that we purchased a building without a clear idea of what is going to happen with this building. Then people who did the consultancy to the tune of consultancy work to the tune of £4 million must have understanding what brief and what commissioning has been done and why we are where we are.
Okay, I think the conversations are moving into areas where it would be much more useful to be done in a review setting, because clearly I don't know whether or not we can progress much further without it becoming, you know, a agenda item that simply takes over the entire evening. So with everyone's permission, I'm going to pause Tom's comments there. Adrian wants to come in. Please, Shane, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make one point, really important point of clarification, the £4 million is not on consultancy work. That includes the purchase of the buildings as well, just to make that clear. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, it's great. Adrian.
That was one of the key points I was going to make, Shane, so thanks for clarifying that. I was just trying to flick through some of the past committees to recognise that. I mean, I think the danger is a lot of, you know, misinformation floats around, isn't it? And so the purpose of a review is to try and accurately understand what has gone on in terms of this particular process. I mean, misinformation, for example, through the nature of the press, who had a headline earlier in the week, which talks about other elements of the scheme being scrapped, which is a complete nonsense. We already heard from the managing director that they were not scrapped at all. The Panama Jacks project was taken off the list because they had a project of their own which they were going to develop, so there was no need to develop in that area. The Trinity House project was taken off because we could not get a buyer, because the private sector tried to squeeze the public sector to get as much money out of us as possible out of a government grant. It's full, you know, so let's be clear about what the problems are. Let's also be clear that the project review is going to be quite tight, as I explained earlier. That we could go into a host of things about why we're in that situation with that project. Because the government decided it was going to allocate money to local government only through beauty parades, only through tight competitions that were given very limited deadlines to submit what you wanted to do. And bear in mind at this stage, we're working on the Towns Fund investment. We were doing the CDF on the arches as well as this, and looking at other rounds. If you remember earlier in the year, looking at the other round for the Levelling Up grant, which was deferred. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff going on where the government is pulling strings on how local government can operate, at the same time as telling us that we are no longer able to purchase properties, which was looking as though it was the only way in which we could increase our income as a local authority through the use of proper income management strategies, because other local authorities around the country had made a complete mess of it and gone way over the top and got themselves into hideous situations of debt. So there's a welter of background stuff about this. So we need our review only to concentrate on what we had control over and what we could do in Worcester. I think the other key aspect which needs to come through as a result of this also is that this, to continue the project as proposed in the paper, is vitally important. This was never ever a project to build a new theatre. It was a concept to develop a rundown area of Worcester, which is exactly what the brief in the High Street Fund was, to develop a rundown area of Worcester, to renovate, to bring back into ownership, to bring back into use old heritage buildings which had languished. And it's a very common approach, and you see it all over the country, and it works successfully. So there's no question that what we were trying to do made absolute sense. There was consultation throughout that process. There was proposals came and went, including the use of number 8 Angel Street for arts offices, including the scaling down of that because the funding needed to be identified to support what was be going on the other side of the street, including the development and the refurbishment of shops along Angel Street itself, including the development of Angel Place, including living over the shop arrangements and all sorts of things. So the whole concept is not dead in the water. Let's not get that thought at all. It's very important that we do continue to provide this and pursue it, but we do it with our eyes open, as Lynn has said, and we do it very carefully, because we know that building costs are just increasing. And don't get me started on the reasons for why building costs are increasing, because we all know that is a bit of a minefield as well at the moment. So, what we also need, when we talk about having independently led consultation and engagement with the stakeholders, what we need is for those stakeholders to come forward and be bold and ambitious and share our ambition and our vision for this area, and to say what they think and to come forward and do that. And one of the difficulties throughout this process in the early months was that there is no business plan. That Worcester Theatres did not produce a business plan, did not work hard to say this is the way in which we can go forward on this. And so there are other people around the table who need to start standing up in this respect, and hopefully that will come out through that process of review as well. It's interesting that Stephen mentioned the swimming pool site, Because of course, one of the driving forces of getting rid of Sanderson Walk swimming pool site was the capital we were going to make out of it in order to develop the new site at Purdiswell. And we didn't do that. It cost us more for a variety of reasons that you mentioned, but not least because we didn't get the sale price that we'd been expecting. And this is, you know, again, if you have a balance of assets that includes looking at what are you going to do with a theatre when you're going to relocate a theatre to a larger arts venue, then you do have to consider where you would have found some of that money from. So that also goes into the balance sheet, Tom. That needs to be remembered very clearly. The other thing I think that's very important
Just wrap it up, Adrian, when you do.
is, well, to be fair, Chair, others have had their say, but I will. The other point I wanted to make clearly is that we have a Worcester City Arts and Cultural Strategy. We have an action plan for that strategy. It was agreed by this committee, by the Place Committee rather, and a key element of that strategy is to improve the lives of our communities and widen participation. It goes on to design and identify a venue for an arts centre for the city with collaborative workshop spaces, etc., etc., etc. In 2023-24, develop and deliver a Scala Performing Arts Centre, develop a legacy plan for the Swan Theatre, maximise the use of community grants, supporting future plans of amateur organisations. So this, what we're talking about tonight forms an absolutely fundamental element of that cultural strategy. And we need to be able to drive that forward and be continue to be ambitious, but make sure that we're doing it within the cost parameters that we've got in front of us, or find money from somewhere else. And if we're bold and ambitious enough, then we will pull more money on board.
Jessie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I support the amendment, and I'm quite happy to not bring the long list of questions I have. As a new member, it wasn't easy reading. Looking at the report, there is a lot of questions about the numbers and the expenditure. And most importantly, I just want to know how I will justify a £4 million spend when we have really little to show for it next time I'm on the doorstep. So I very much welcome that amendment. Thank you very much.
What I'm going to do is we'll go to the recommendations. I'm going to take them one at a time so there's no possibility of any ambiguity about what we do, etc. Oh, I beg your pardon, yes. Yeah, we'll take, as we're doing it line by line, so to speak, the amendment will flow through as we go, so to speak. So 1.1 is noting the financial challenges and other project risks as you see before you there. Can you just indicate that you've noted that, please? Okay. 1.2 agrees to stop any further work on the 500-seat auditorium scheme, which is being worked up to REBA stage 4. Indicate acceptance of that, please. Thank you. Any against? Abstentions? 1.3, this is where I will bring Sian in because we just make sure we get the amendment at its, you know, absolutely right. Do you have it before you, Sian, or shall I?
Yes, Chair. I'll make a start.
Okay, all right. 1.3 is authorises officers with the oversight of the major programmes member reference group to undertake the following actions. Commission further work subject to ongoing dialogue with DLUC on a circa 300-seat alternative proposal for an arts venue. This work will include additional concept design, REBA stage 2, and develop further detailed design, REBA stage 3. Indicate acceptance of that, please, if you would. And against, and abstentions. We have that? Okay. Point 2, commence a process of consultation, and we ought to go on stage with this.
We built it, you can.
Yeah. Commence a process of independently led consultation and engagement with all interested stakeholders in the arts community in order to identify best uses for the spaces within the buildings and assist in the development of a viable and sustainable operating model for the alternative proposals. Those in favour of that, please. Any against or abstentions? No. And then we go into point 3. Is that correct? Yes. Make a resubmission or amendment of the planning application in respect of an alternative scheme for an arts venue informed by consultation with the arts community. Those in favour? Yeah. And point 1.4, Charlie?
This is the new 1.4, undertake, sorry, the new, forgive me, Chair, it's the new subclause, Roman numeral 4, undertake a review into the development of the project to date in order to take lessons learned which can inform the future direction of the project.
Okay, many thanks for that. Those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? No. And 1.4 notes that a further report will be brought to committee in October. Acceptance of that? Thank you. Good. Okay, to move on to agenda item 8, medium-term financial plan. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. As members will be well aware by now, from previous discussions we've had at the committee, we have a position where our medium-term financial plan has a budget gap, a gap between our spending and our income. As we met in February of this year, that gap stood at 1.7 million. It's likely to extend on current estimates to 2.2 million by the time we get to our budget in February of next year. And through the lifetime of the plan is expected to grow by about £500,000 a year, to reaching a point of about 3.8 million. So this is a process which we have got to address. We talked through at our last committee a process by which we do that. And just as a reminder, as it sets out at 3.1, we are going through a process whereby we try to identify whatever we can in terms of efficiencies and savings which have no impact on policy or service delivery. Then we'll be looking at savings which do have a policy impact, and we'll be bringing them to this committee for consideration. We'll look at posts which can potentially be freed up by voluntary redundancies, and if that doesn't achieve all that we need to achieve by the time we get to budget setting in February, then potentially we will look to make any service redesign that we can, which might potentially lead to compulsory redundancies. So the progress to date, which is the purpose of this report, is to bring us up to date with where we are. And the chart just above paragraph 3.4 shows progress against that target. Now, I've set the target at 2.5 million, which is aiming towards the 2.25, but gives us a little room to overshoot that. As always, the best targets try to go a little bit further than you absolutely need to. That gives us some options potentially of things that we may not want to do. And progress to date, we've identified approximately £980,000 in terms of the efficiencies, vacant posts which can potentially be deleted, and so on and so forth. So very grateful to all the heads of service across the council have come forward with numerous ideas and proposals which we've brought forward into there. Then there are a band which is about 260,000, which we've identified, which do fall into that requirement for a committee decision because they have a policy or a service impact, and those are to be, some of those will be addressed this evening, partly in this report and partly in other reports on the agenda. And then so far our voluntary redundancy processes resulted in estimated £370,000 in annual savings, but there is more work to do on that as things stand. So we've made good progress. There is still plenty of work to do, but this is Q1, so it's our first time we've been able to bring to you these considerations, and we'll continue to do that as we progress through the year. So the main part of the report for consideration this evening is those proposals set out at paragraph 4.4, which are within those areas that are for to members to consider, make a decision on. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. There's more information about each one of them in the report, but just in summary, the proposals for consideration tonight are that we cease the Saturday skip service. This costs, we estimate, around £50,000 in operating costs and overtime to complete the service. There is a separate report to follow around bulky waste service operation, which is obviously related to this, but we'll follow on later at the moment. But we think the Saturday skip service is one that we can consider ceasing separately to that. Secondly, sponsorships and advertising. We've been advertising for a number of years, or taking advertisements on our website, on roundabouts and in other locations. We want to expand and develop that, but we're conscious that that's a public-facing activity, so we're interested in views from members as to how we take that forward. Some years ago, we brought forward a proposal for advertising on car parks, which at the time was turned down over concerns about how that would be managed and governed. So I've included in Appendix 2 a lot of information about, Appendix 1 rather, a lot of information about how we control that process at the moment. So that needs to be considered and developed. The third is to bring City Life magazine to an end. It's been there for 15 years, I think, that we've been running that. And of course, since that time, there's been a lot of development around forms of communication with the public other than a regular newsletter. Many, many councils now don't provide those, but simply replace that with an e-newsletter. This gives us the opportunity to communicate much more frequently and in many different ways. Obviously, as part of that, we will need to ensure that those who don't have access to e-communications will still be able to receive information from the council. And we will consider a number of ways in which we do that as we look to implement that scheme. And then finally, in this group, Guildhall Sunday closing. We've been closing the Guildhall on Sundays since May. It was a relatively new idea, opening the Guildhall on Sundays, but because of changes in staff and so on, it's been shut since May on Sundays, and the proposal is to continue to do that. In truth, as the report says, there are very few visitors on a Sunday. Most of them appeared to be coming just to use the comfort facilities. We are open for special civic occasions, and so we'll continue to do that. And we will occasionally open for events if there's a particular request to do that, fee-paying events. Most of those who had looked to book on a Sunday were happy to change that to a Saturday. So we think that's something that can easily be managed. Taking that into account, that's a contribution of £88,000 a year to our savings target. And then the last of those is slightly different. This is something we've considered at the committee before, and we'll bring back a full detailed business case in respect of this at the next meeting. But I wanted to progress that. I've seen the details of that business case, and I can assure you that it stands up as those figures which are presented there as savings as a result of that capital work will be achievable. So the reason for bringing it now is because we want to make progress towards that. So I'm asking for a commitment to the capital programme. So this is a nominal commitment. It's just simply flagging that it goes into the capital programme. It's not a commitment of spending. That won't happen until we've got the full detailed business case. But I'm seeking your agreement to progress that by way of recognising that the capital will be committed. So those are the main parts of this report. There are colleagues here who will be able to answer detailed questions should members have any. I'll just say a little bit more. Now, I won't say any more about the voluntary redundancy process other than what I've already said. We are progressing that, and we will be bringing the outcome of that exercise to a scheduled meeting in October of this year. Thank you, members. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Shane. Questions, comment to Shane to the report, please. Robin, and then Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully supporting of the proposals that are being made. The devil, as ever, will always be in the detail. And one of the concerns that I have is the replacement for the City Life magazine. I don't think we do a very good job of communicating with our residents. And I think if we're replacing a magazine that hits every doorstep, and replacing that with an e-letter, I think we need to be very, very careful about how we structure that information flow to make it appealing to the readership. So, I would be very interested in understanding a bit more about how we're going to approach the replacement of the City Life magazine.
Karen Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say the City Life magazine, we found out last year that it hadn't been delivered to a lot of houses for a long time, in fact. So lots of residents hadn't been receiving it at all for ages. But my points are, with the Saturday skip service, have we asked the ward members about the Saturday skips potentially being removed from their wards, and whether they've got concerns with fly tipping or any, increase in littering in their areas, particularly the ones which are operatives I know say that some of the sites are less well used than others. So would there be an option to keep perhaps one or two of the best used sites in the wards where members still have concerns? Or if we do it and take them away and we see a really negative impact on the area, could we do something to help? Because I know that some more members raise fly tipping as a big issue. And then the other thing for the advertising, I can see you've got a really comprehensive list of what you don't allow, but I would ask whether you can also include something that means that we do not have advertising that does not align with our council targets for net zero. I know that there are other councils who will not allow adverts for example, going on massive holidays with planes or SUVs and stuff like that. And so I think it'd be really good if it aligns with our values as well. Thank you.
Just in respect of the question around bulky waste, Chair, we haven't. Sorry, Saturday skip. Sorry. We haven't consulted directly with ward members. We've been discussing the proposal with group leaders as part of leadership meetings, but we've not done anything directly with ward councillors. And obviously, the proposal this evening is that the scheme is withdrawn in totality. What we have done through looking back at past data is that there's definitely a general downward trend in use of those sites across all of the sites. I was just totting up some numbers before we came, and on average now, for us being on a site for 4 hours, we're having around 14, 15 pedestrians and 5 cars, and that's costing us £50,000 a year for less than 20 people to be attending. So for that reason, this is why it's being proposed as something for us to withdraw. And of course, if there was an unforeseen impact or a significant impact, then we can always bring something back to members at a future stage, whether that be sort of locality specific or something a bit more general. So hopefully that answers the question.
Then Tom.
Yes, I have mixed views on these savings, but I do believe, we do have to, reduce our budget. I'm aware that some of our members have fought hard for Saturday skip services in their areas, and they will be disappointed that they are disappearing. But there are alternative ways of actually dealing with this. I think sponsorship is something that is actually very, very important. And yes, sponsorship does need to be something that is, compatible with our sort of values and that. Regarding City Light magazine, yes, that is going to be missed. And the people who are going to miss it most are the people who aren't internet savvy, who have access to electronic things. So what I would suggest is that that when the officers do communicate to people, ask them if for email addresses and if they are willing to receive direct communication from the actual city council. So we're in a position where we can actually send out bulk emails on sort of matters of actual importance and that. The Guildhall Sunday closing, I think that's something we have to do. But what I would say is, if there was ever the scope for the Guildhall to become like a weekend tourist venue, we wanted to consider that. We would consider, rather than closing on Sunday, closing on Monday, and only opening up at about in the evening if we have an evening meeting or stuff and that. You go to a lot of towns and cities around Europe and that, and often it's Sunday when these public buildings are open, but it's actually Monday when they're actually closed because of the actual tourist trade you have at the actual weekend and that. That's something not to consider now, but perhaps just something to bear in mind for future when you do go to a 6-day-a-week Guildhall. And I think the solar panel thing, that is absolutely an essential idea. It's been talked about for a few years now. We have buildings which have considerable roof space on them, and the payback now on solar panel is a lot better than it was a few years ago.
Thank you very much, Chair. I must admit that in terms of the delivery of the City Life magazine, it has been hit and miss affair. To be honest, I think I was at some stage I was collating the list of postcodes where the magazine hasn't been received for quite a long time. So I don't think it's a massive issue. What I would like to raise is alleviating the impact, and this is in reference to what Stephen and Robin were saying, the impact of withdrawing it on those who do get it, who are lucky enough to get it. I just really hope that those who are not receiving the magazine for quite some time, that it does something positive for the recycling rates in the city. At least it ends up in the recycling bins. The one thing which staying on the theme of alleviation and sort of trying to mitigate the impact of the decisions taken here. With the Guildhall Sunday closing, I mean, my experience of seeing beautiful, proudly looking buildings like this one, open and accessible during the time when there is a lot of interest and a lot of tourists are being drawn, this is very positive. So, whereas I understand the reasons behind trying to make savings, what I would like to see is having a rethink of the marketing strategy around this building. I'm saying this particularly today, being conscious of what we talked about yesterday in the Place and Economic Development meeting and the brilliant use that the museums are being put to, with lots and lots of partners and local stakeholders and communities using the buildings. And I'm afraid that scaling down again, sort of reflection from the income management subcommittee, scaling down the expected income from rental of this place and how it's used. I would hate to see this place being mothballed and not used to its full capacity. It should be thriving, open to everybody, all communities, especially those who don't venture into the Guildhall, so that it can be shared and used to its full capacity. So I suppose the digital inclusion element, what do we do to mitigate the fact that not everybody receives information on email, and then do we have an ambitious plan to run this building in a way that it's close and accessible to everyone?
Yeah, if I may, with regard to through you, Chair, with regard to the Guildhall, I think the point is made that the footfall into the building is relatively low. The visitors to this building do not provide unlike the Commandery, for example, there's not an income stream attached to that. It's a free building, so it's always going to run at a net cost. I think a couple of important points to make is that the Tourist Information Centre is not part of the closure. So visitors coming into the city will still be able to access the TIC. We're not closing the TIC on a Sunday. I think the other point is that and the point has been made, I'm just rehearsing it really, that if the building is, if people want to use the building for an event, we will be open for events at the weekend, so we won't close the building permanently. If people want to put on a particular event, we've run weddings previously. We continue to offer wedding opportunities. If anybody wants to get booking in soon, I'll do a special deal. No one particular in mind. Okay. So we will open the building for events, and one of the reasons why we had to scale back, to be really honest, is that we became, I suppose, victims of our own success. I think is a reasonable way of looking at it, and we were putting on more and more grand parties and weddings, and trying to get the adequate coverage from staff. Part-time, temporary, casual staff, and managing a rota to make sure the building, it's a very big building, to make sure that the building is safe to a 150 wedding party takes a lot of resources, and I think it's fair to say that we were a little bit on the ragged edge of being able to deliver that. So rather than risk something untoward happening, we did make the decision that we would scale back on those activities to make sure that we could accommodate people absolutely professionally and make sure we gave a good service. But the building will continue to be open on weekends if we have bookings and events planned. And as I say, the TIC will continue also to be open. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We've got Steve, and then I don't know if there's anyone else around them. Lynn, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, whenever we're looking at cost-cutting measures, it's not an easy process, and but I just want to recognise that the officers have been looking at this carefully and recommending things which make sense and cause the least disruption to the citizens of Worcester. Just one small plea, which is maybe the opposite of cost saving, given that sponsorship and advertising is mentioned there in terms of increasing revenue. Can we review not having advertising on our website, because it makes it really awful to use it, and it becomes much more important day by day that citizens are able to easily utilize our internet offering for paying and reporting.
Shane? Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, that's something that we've been doing for a year or so now. It was designed to be a trial to see how it worked, whether it brought in sufficient amounts of income to justify it. And I've received different views as to how successful that has been. We mentioned a couple of times about what controls we have over that. And for example, councillors came to me with some concerns about some of the adverts, which we then made sure were taken down and spoke to the advertisers about them. So there's a degree of control which we can put on that. One of the earlier versions of this report talked about, or some of the background papers which come along with it, talk about different approaches to advertising on the website. So rather than just having banners which are there constantly, but actually providing space and pages for individuals to use a bit of space for a period of time, rather than taking different approaches. And we're also talking about advertorials in the local papers as well as another way of doing that. So it's all under review, Stephen. I'm quite happy to look at different ways of doing that, and any feedback that we get from members about how that looks and how it works will be very welcome and very useful. And sorry, can I just add one more thing in terms of the city plan? Yes, we will continue to provide published information in hard copy. We've got to work out what the best way to do that is, but also it's what we're proposing. We will use a third party to do the electronic management delivery of that magazine. So we'll be employing experts who currently in neighbouring authorities who currently do this, and so they understand all the concerns and issues about that and all the data protection principles which we have to put in place. So it's not something we're just starting from scratch, sending out some emails. We've got we'll be seeking a proper professional approach to doing that, and we will bring that information to you later when we've got a bit further with that.
I've just got one point of clarification that we might like to, I think we should make actually. Thanks, Lloyd's just whispered in my ear. If you look at the proposals, we need to just be clear on when some of these things will be implemented from. So we've already mentioned the fact that the Guildhall has been closing because we've been carrying vacancies, and what we would like to do as of the decision today is therefore draw a line under those vacancies and not fill them, so that we would carry on as is, for want of a better phrase. But we just need to be clear on things like the Saturday skips, when we're actually, it doesn't actually say in the report, I believe, when we're proposing to cease the service. So we do need to clarify that point. The point I would make, and I've made this at previous committees is that in order to balance the books this year, the year we're in at the moment, there will be a requirement, you know, for a significant transfer of funding from our reserves. So the more we can do earlier this year, the less call we will have on reserves at the end of this year in order to balance the books. So I'm not inventing policy on the hoof here by saying, you know, we do it from after this meeting, but we will need to clarify and get member agreement when we actually implement these changes. If that's okay. Thank you.
I've got Lynn and then Jabba. And Marjorie, sorry.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's not a comfortable place, is it? None of these decisions are ones that we really want to make, other than, I mean, arguably, the solar panels on Purdyswell and St Martin's Gate. That is an invest to save scheme, and that, you know, for me, is kind of completely in line with our sort of core values, our city plan aspirations. It is about using green energy, reducing carbon, and as long as we've got the money to be able to do it and the finance stacks up, that's absolutely fine. Yes, varying concerns about some of the others. I absolutely hear what colleagues have said around city life. It doesn't reach all the parts. And I have to say, having done my first ever joint leader column, the kind of print deadline, the sort of copy deadline, and then the print deadline, and then when it actually gets to people, it's actually really challenging to be thinking 2 months ahead with what is topical news. So in fact, you know, if as a council we can communicate with people more regularly and on a more topical way, I think that will be helpful. And I think to make sort of greater use of, I mean, we're very privileged in Worcester to still have local newspapers, so to make more use of Worcester News and the Observer and the kind of communities style of communication and information sharing as opposed to a news press release. I think that may well reach some of the people that aren't necessarily online. So there are, to be more innovative about the advertising. Yeah, I mean, if the list of people we won't accept adverts from is too long, then, you know, who is left to step up to the plate? And you know, the fact of not from manufacturers and distributors of tobacco products and alcohol, and why I understand they're a health risk, actually the visitor economy is dependent on, you know, restaurants and refreshment, you know, for places to go out and eat, and they could be a key kind of source of advertising revenue. So whether we just need to do a bit of reconsideration of some of that, you know, there are, you know, a number of businesses and organisations that have a sort of social responsibility that they want to deliver, and don't kind of underestimate the value of, you know, our audience. The City Council audience is every single resident of Worcester, which is a valuable market, a valuable sort of set of people to advertise to. I know that the Saturday skips are undoubtedly valued by those wards, those places who are privileged to have them, but it does only benefit a few. It is a non-discretionary service, as is the bulky waste service. And I think, you know, the bulky waste service is citywide, it is under review, and, you know, as councillors within the Labour group are really keen to ensure that that is a viable service, and, you know, to involve other organisations, the social landlords, in making sure that it is. So it's with great reluctance to sort of, you know, to take the savings for the Saturday skip, but, you know, the bulky waste service does reach everybody. It is accessible for those who can afford it, and it's actually quite a modest charge. So, you know, we need to promote the bulky waste service and find a sustainable way for that. And the Saturday skips are not part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor and then Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to focus just around in terms of some of the income generation strategies that we've kind of previously agreed in through the Income Management Committee, and a lot of them focused around obviously being proactive in and around the Guildhall, our advertising web space in terms of that. So it's key to bear in mind that some of the policies and decisions that we've already made in some of those other committees that fit into the wider intention of us growing income within the city councils. And it's with reluctance that I kind of accept the concept of the Guildhall not being able to pay for itself, but the harsh reality is that we've tried a business plan and a model and in order to execute that, and that hasn't been realized, and it's ended up costing us more than it has. So, you know, it's not for want of trying that we haven't tried some of these other income generation strategies. I mean, what I really kind of wanted to focus on is that for fear of paralysis and stifling and reaching a state of non-movement, I think there's a certain level of pragmatism and sense check of what the reality of the situation that we are in terms of some of the decisions that we are making. And if we are, you know, to the level of scrutiny that we go into in terms of that, we won't make progress, and there is some common ground that is needed amongst us. And I think generally we've handled a lot of the debate with that in mind, and in some of the decisions that have come that we are making this evening, each individual member has thought long and hard about the effect of those, and that the compromises that the officers have brought before us are sensible and the least impactful to this city council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to express a reservation I have about advertising on roundabouts. I was in a planning committee meeting a couple of years ago when we considered quite a number of applications. And I said then, and I think I still believe that that we should keep that it's clutter basically, and that it certainly doesn't contribute to road safety, and it might in some cases actually make our roads less safe because the advertising could be a distraction. So I think I'd like us to have another look at that, especially in view of the fact that it doesn't actually raise very much money.
Any further comment or questions? Sean?
Chair, could I just clarify in terms of Councillor Lewin proposed an amendment effectively to the advertising sort of rules, because she asked for a commitment around advertising around net zero. Right. And it occurred to me that that might be usefully delegated to chair and vice chair to oversee the final wording, because it could be wide or narrow, that concept. And if I take Councillor Riaz's word around pragmatism, but we ought to take soundings from chair and vice chairs of the committee and try and get the wording right. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm very happy with that, Sean. I have seen other councils who've got an approach for it, so it'd be really good to look what they are doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Right. So just before we go to the recommendations, just going to make sure that we underline the point made in 7.1 here, that the recommendation is that each of these, i.e. the proposals on 1.2, are, should they be agreed, they will be implemented as soon as possible to minimise the impact on reserves of the planned in-year overspend. So, then to go to, Sean, do we need to take each item individually, as it were, so that they could be?
I don't think so.
No.
I think you have to take them on block.
Okay,
But
that's
subject to that amendment around the advertising, the word, so the precise wording for the advertising policy to be delegated to chair and vice chairs, or to delegated to director of resources in consultation with chair and vice chairs.
Right. So would members be content if they've heard the provisional wording of that amendment to the sponsorship, the sponsorship point? So that will be then taken away and worked on by myself and the vice chairs, and we will come up with, I'm sure, words of wisdom. Okay. So just to take each point in it, individually, note the progress made to date towards identifying, towards closing the identified budget gap of 1.7 million. We note that, agreed. 1.2, consider the options identified in the report, specify those to be implemented in order to close the projected budget gap of £2.25 million for 24-25, and you see those before you. Those to be implemented, would you kindly show your approval? If you do, please. Anyone against? No, fine, thank you. And 1.3 recommends to council an adjustment to the capital programme of £710,240 to enable progress on energy cost reduction works on council assets. Those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Thank you. Right. Okay. At this precise moment, I'm going to suggest that if if Julian would pause the video, we take 5 minutes to use what the facilities or what else you'd like to do.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I'm not going to follow your instruction. Unfortunately, this is a complex area. It's one that actually, I've been working on for 2 or 3 years now to try and get these grants into a sort of shape that I'm happy with. The proposals here need quite a bit of detailed consideration. So I'm going to go through it quite carefully and pause along the way to make sure that everyone's following where we're at. And what's proposed is actually quite different to what we currently do as well. So it's important to understand the rationale behind all of that. So without going into the background in a great deal of detail, needless to say, over a long period of time, we've committed various forms of funding for one reason or another. And this has sort of grown historically, and there are all sorts of different rationales and decisions as to why we provide grants to third parties. And what we've been trying to do over a while now is to bring that together so we've got a clear structure and an approach which everybody understands and is straightforward and is consistent. And so naturally, I start by trying to follow the money. So if you look at the table 1 and paragraph 3.1, you can see that actually grants might appear in some of those other areas. There's premises, for example. We have a number of organisations which have peppercorn rents or pay as a rent, and we pay them a grant in lieu of that rent, so it's a neutral cost. So there are lots of different ways, but the key ones here are third-party payments. That's where most of our grants are. In fact, all of them in effect that I'm going to talk about tonight. So that includes shared services of 3.3 million and also grants and agreements of 1.7 million. So those are broken down in the table under 3.3 into 2 bits, what are referred to as service level agreements and budgeted grants to third parties. Those are the budget lines which appear. So when you look through the budget book, that's where you'll see this spending. And you might say, well, why are you bothering with service level agreements? Well, because it shows that sort of overlap between the kind of payments we're making to third parties and what are called grants. So it's important to recognise those two. So just to run through the service level agreements, so 377 there. So 206,000 of that is a payment to Malvern Hills for provision of accounts payable and receivable. So in effect, it's a contract. They do the work, we pay them the grant. And that's going to be something that's reviewed as part of the shared services. So we're not touching that. 84080 is what would often be referred to as a grant and has been referred to as a grant in previous papers. That is a payment which we make to Worcester Community Trust. It's linked to the fact, it's not worded correctly there, it's not about maintaining the assets, but they deliver services and we support the delivery of the services they deliver through our assets. So it's important and value to us that they continue to do that work, because otherwise we'd have to do it in those buildings. So it's actually, in a sense, an extension of what the council's activity. So I'm not proposing that we touch that, because it's something that's linked to the lease and stays as it is. However, it's worth noting that the last time they presented a business plan to us, they made a commitment to reduce day-to-day maintenance costs, of which we pick up a share, currently 75% of those, and over time those will reduce to zero. So although they don't feature in this report, they have made a commitment to us in terms of reducing costs, so that offsets that to some extent. And the remaining part in service level agreement is the grant to WABAC. That's £30,000 a year, and we intend to continue to doing that. And a 10k contribution to Worcester Strategic Partnerships Office. So this is a person hosted by the City Council, does a wide range of things in terms of community services support across the county. Okay, so that's something that's been going for 10 years or so, and again, not one that we want to touch, because it's something that is delivering on our behalf. There is a small amount of inflation built into that process, which we don't need. So I can suggest that we can take those inflation element out, which have been built up. So a small efficiency saving, which is quite straightforward, doesn't lead to any reductions or anything like that. Okay, so that's the 370,000 already taken out. So of the 1.7, we now turn to the 1.3 million, which is the budgeted grant to third parties, and those are broken down in the table at 5.2. And you can see from the start that of that, 593,000 is actually UK SPF money. So this is money that we're giving to people or supporting activities, and is all funded from UK SPF. So in the budget, those two things net each other off. So we could reduce that, but we'd be reducing the income as well. So, we're using the income on something else. So there's nothing to be gained in respect of those. So we can take those out of the picture. Then what we're left with is those which we do fund ourselves. So 343,000 is for the Leisure Partnership. Now that's in there as a one-off payment because we made a commitment to support Freedom Leisure in terms of its energy costs. Okay, that was set at the budget time. Now since then, the expectation is that's going to be much lower. So there will be a reduction there, and that has already been included in that 900,000 I was talking about earlier in the previous report. Okay, so there's another 343 which we're not touching. We're not touching here, that is to say. So the rest relate to community development and corporate events, and these are the two large grants and also the small grants pot which we do. Now, those of you who were with us back in December 21 when we last looked at this, what we came up with was the arrangement in 5.6. So that table there, 305,000. So we have a number of grants which we define as large grants, and which we sometimes use the term city grants, because these are committed to over the lifetime of the city plan to support those organisations, subject to an annual review around affordability, that we can continue to do it, and also that they continue to provide services that we want to commission. So what I'm proposing in respect of those large ones is to take a couple of them out. Again, these are the grant that we give to Worcester Theatres and the Pod Grange Hub, because they are the same thing as Worcester Community Trust in a way. They're providing activity which we support through our own assets. Which again, if they weren't, then we'd have to be picking up some of that. So I'm putting those in with the Worcester Community Trust type group, so not touching that. And the remaining ones are for various organisations which we support. And what's proposed here is that we start to reduce the amount of grant over time. So rather than simply ceasing it, to say, well, let's look at whether or not that's something that you can potentially look elsewhere to find support. We'll work with you to achieve a sustainable position, as we have done with Worcester Community Trust, for example, in the past, and try to move that down over time. That gives us time to reconsider and keep looking at it as we progress. So at 5.12, I've just set out, if we were to reduce that by 25% over the next 4 years, that's what that would look like in terms of the reducing grant for those organisations. Okay, are you with me so far? Yeah, take questions.
Yeah, please.
Right, okay. I was listening, I just didn't take it in.
Any further comment at this point? Okay, happy to proceed, Shane.
Right, so the small grants pot, as it's always known as, is 81,500. So back in December 21, when we looked at it, we'd had an ongoing discussion about Worcester Arts Council, which we were contributing 3,500 a year, and brought that within the pot. And then we decided that actually they were carrying out a valuable service on our behalf. So we reinstated that and said that from now on, £3,500 will come out of that pot. And the remainder, therefore, is available to support small grants. Now, at the moment, this is done on a sort of first come, first served basis. There is a group, a committee, which meets and considers proposals, and the maximum value for each one of those grants is £5,000. Now, this year, UKSPF has been funding 45,000 of that, and that is within UKSPF as well. So we've substituted some of our own grant, which we were paying in the past, for that. And what I'm proposing here is that we now then reduce the remaining part of it that we pay for, and so only that remains in that pot is what is UKSPF subsidised. Now, in the future, if we get other external funding, we could use that to supplement that. But it's basically a reduction in that overall pot to 45,000 freeing up £33,000 as a saving. Now, because this reduces the amount available, it would suggest that the overall award for each individual one reduces from 5,000, that needs to be agreed yet, but 2,500, 3,000 maybe. But also that rather than having it on a first come, first serve basis, we have a call for bids. And we bring all the bids together, operate a scoring system, and then bring the results of that exercise to this committee rather than a separate group to confirm or reject the proposals and consider different ones. Okay, so we'll go through that process and bring the results here for agreement. And I've set out a short timetable under 5.17 how we would do that. We will have to finalise the criteria. I've set out a scoring system in an appendix, which needs to be refined and developed. We'll bring that back in September, and then if we get agreement to that, go out for a call for bids at that stage. That doesn't leave a lot of time. We could extend that. The trade-off is between having more time to get more bids in and having those successful ones notified as soon as possible that they've got funding for the coming year. So there's a trade-off to be done there. So I've proposed the shorter timetable, but we could extend that if need be. Okay, so that's quite a different change from what we're doing at the moment for small grants. There was another little bit in there called other corporate costs. Well, that's just the grants that we give to St Peter's and Warner Parish Council. So again, no proposals to change that at all. Okay, the remaining component of what's in the annual revenue budgets is DWAS. There's quite a lot of detail here in terms of how that scheme works and how it's funded. Many authorities have reduced this and have often replaced it with grant funding from elsewhere. In this council, we've continued it. It's shown at 6.8, where an annual budget which has continued and grown over time. And this last couple of years, when we've had a household support fund, we've added that to the DWAS budget, whereas many councils have actually substituted it out. And what I'm proposing here is that we take that approach from now on, that rather than adding household support grant to DWAS, we use household support grant to replace the DWAS funding. And because that's a slightly risky strategy, we don't know, for example, at this stage whether HSG will carry on through next year. I'm proposing only at this stage to do that on a 25% of the DWAS, so we're not eating too much of it away. And then that's ground that we can potentially recover if it turns out that we don't get future funding which we can use in this purpose. To do that, reduces the base budget by 29,690. Now, you can swap out the household support grant or the base budget, whichever way you do it, but there's an effect, there's a reduction of 29,690 there. Those are all the grants which are actually built into our annual budgets. Okay, that goes back to that 1.7 million we were talking about. We have also, over time, provided various pots of money to various organisations for one reason or another, through committee decisions or through different processes. Those are set out, most of them, I think there are still probably some which aren't in there in table 6. They are coming to a natural end, so I'm proposing that we pause on each one of those. There will need to be a separate decision as to whether we want to fund them on a one-off basis, dependent upon the reserves that we've got. We also have had, in the last few years, a one-off £50,000 from reserves for anything which comes through during the year, which we haven't considered. So we've got something which we can provide support for. In view of our need to reduce costs, I had originally proposed that should be reduced to 0, but I think actually we need to still have something which can support ad hoc applications for funding. So I'm suggesting that we reduce it by half to £25,000, and again, slightly change the approach. So we set out at the beginning of the year a set of corporate events, the things that we want to see funded, things that we're promoting through the course of the year, and invite applicants to support those activities, whether it's festival-based or relates to the Christmas fair or the Worcester show, or things which actually relate to the things which we as an organisation are supporting, rather than receiving ad hoc requests on a fairly random basis. The proposal is that those are considered in the way that they currently are, which is that they apply to the managing director, who in consultation with the relevant committee makes the decision as to whether or not that award should be made. Okay, so that's in line with our existing practice. So, in a nutshell, the preferred option sets out total budget savings of 59430. at paragraph 8.1, which rises, so that's about 10% of our overall grants which are available for us to use, and that rises to 113,000 as we move out over the lifetime of the city plan, those grants which are supported from large grants and corporate events pots. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
To that part of the report, or you don't need Tom?
Thank you very much. I have one quick question and one suggestion. I'll start with the question. In terms of 520, the remaining small items cover annual grants to St. Peter's and London Parish Council. So I'd like to understand it a little bit more, because I think it was only yesterday we nodded through a small amount of money to St. Peter's Parish Council for some equipment on the playground. What's the decision-making process, and how does it, in terms of, is there enough scrutiny? Because I'm thinking Parish Council would be eligible for some Section 106 funding as well. So are we comfortable? And I know it's not big sort of expenditure item. It's just something that I would like to understand a little bit better. In terms of the suggestion, on the last, that's not the last page of the report, it's the appendix, the draft scoring system for small grants application. I think whether at this stage or at some point when we receive feedback from the grants, could I please suggest and ask for this to be minuted, because I've mentioned this a few times before, to try and join the dots between the approach that we've got in the community engagement team, for instance, or housing, where we look into the asset-based community development approach, and try to come up with the metrics. There is a various of suggestions there available that would tell us what the grant brought in terms of social value. So whether you use HACT or any other methodology, you can come up with something which will demonstrate the quantitative value added to the local community by offering that grant. I think it's important, and that's why I suggest for this to be minuted, because with the reduced capacity to support some of the brilliant community projects, I think it's important to know that there is an element which is not necessarily visible among the headline figures. So those would be my two question and suggestion. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. In terms of the first, I'm not close enough to the detail of the grants that we pay to the parish councils. I do know that they've been there for a very long time. This is something which we supported. Obviously, they have their precepting opportunity, so they can raise funds through that means, but there's always been some specific elements of grant that we pay for to them in terms of actual certain activities which are delivered. So I can take to give you more detail about that subsequently, if that's okay. In terms of the added social value of the grants, yes, we're always looking to try and find a way in which, moving to a more commissioning style approach to these, that we understand that what we're getting is giving us what we want in terms of our objectives. There are two problems you always come across in terms of this. The first is that if you're too prescriptive about that, you start to get in the tangle over VAT. Let's not go down that particular route, but there is a concern which we need to work about. And the second is trying to find a balance between a simple application which doesn't prevent those who don't have a lot of means to put complex applications in place from applying for grants. So you need to try and keep it as simple as possible, while at the same time ensuring you've got enough information from them to make sure that it does match with your objectives. So balancing those two items, I'm more than happy to look at ways in which we can do that better. The example that I gave there in the appendix is an adaptation of something we currently use around providing relief for business rates and things like that, where groups are coming to us and saying, can we get some relief on this? So it's probably not the best one to use, but it's an example of the kind of thing which is currently in use. That's why I put it in there.
If I may, so I'm really grateful for the willingness to consider this. And as I said, HACT is a simple example where a number of those questions would be falling into the matrix, where It doesn't have to be necessarily a stumbling block at the application stage. It could be gathered at the feedback stage in terms of this is what we've delivered, and that's the. I'll give you an example. You know, £1 invested in culture brings 11 quid to the local economy. So that's the kind of logic behind it. I think it would be useful for the general public as well to see what the money buys and how it enhances the community.
Adrian.
Yes. I've got a question really just to allay, won't say concern, but just a query from the Lippard Hub, which I'm a trustee of, and that is regarding the changing in the funding arrangements, grant arrangements of it. Will this mean, for example, that the current grant that the community centre currently has and actually need, because it has actually been had its finances affected adversely by the shutdown with the COVID, will those streams of finance continue for the coming months and years ahead with this new arrangement, or will there be anything noticeable?
In respect of the Lippard Hub, the proposal here is to make no change to the grant that we currently provide to them. So that will continue, yes.
Thank you very much, that's good.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's just really quick. I sit on the hot market as trustee, and we do a small grant similar. And I really welcome a more robust scoring system. We come together once in a year, look at all the applications, score them comparatively as well, which really helps you. And also then, you know, it's really good to get feedback then from the grants afterwards to reinform the next year. Did they spend it wisely, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So I really welcome this. Thank you.
And I'd be happy to borrow that methodology if it was.
I sat on the small grants panel for the past nearly 4 years, and contrary to what it says here, well, it says we're going to introduce, we'll include a scoring system to aid decision making. The grants panel does have a scoring system to aid decision making, and in fact it has a more rigorous scoring system than the one described in the draft appendix. For example, we asked the question, does the project have a clear purpose with measurable outcomes? Because quite often people come with quite vague ideas and you can be puzzled as to what it is they want to do. We also asked, can the organisation provide match funding to 50%? And there's no mention of match funding here. And finally, we asked, will the event have minimal impact on the environment? And I certainly think we should include that because it's in line with our aims. So in general, I'd like to suggest that that we compare this draft scoring system with what we already have and make sure that the best is retained. And also, I'd just like to say that in my time on the grants panel, I've seen some absolutely great projects that have added a lot of value to the city and benefited our residents. I'm very glad that we can continue doing that, even if it's on a more restricted basis.
Adrian.
I'm trying to understand paragraph 7, in that you come up with this figure of 198,000 over 3 years of money which has come from reserves for that list of organisations, and then in 7.4 you say there's a further allocation of 50,000 on top of that, but the proposal is to reduce the 50,000 to 25,000. But if it had been 50,000 each year, for those 3 years, it would have been 150. So is the 198 made out of the 150 plus that 50? Or is that something else? And so therefore, in relation to recommendation 1.5, which I believe is what's outlined in 7.5, does that scratch all that 198,000 and reduce all those organisations to bid for 25,000 per year?
Through you, Chair. So to answer the first question, the 50,000 is on top of the 198. So it's an additional amount to all of those grants. And the important point about those one-offs from reserves is that it's an annual amount. So that it's not as if you're replacing the whole 45,000 with the portion of 25,000. The 198 is the total over 2 or 3 years, whereas this would be available each year. So the gap isn't quite as great. Nonetheless, it's a substantial gap. But all of those which are considered there are ones which have come to committee or to a decision at some point. So there's nothing to stop that happening again. There's no reason why people can't come forward with proposals or come to a committee for an opportunity to. I mean, for instance, I think the Worcester Food Bank was one we worked on, Lynn, which came through a committee process, and we agreed that, and the funding source and so on. So, we can still do that, but we just need to going forward, make sure that we understand why we're doing it and how it fits into what we're trying to do as an organisation. So, take again that more kind of commissioning approach to these. My sense is, and looking through the report and looking through them all, is that it's built up over time for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's difficult to understand why we gave that one organisation some money and not that one. So we're just trying to bring it back into a place where, so this idea of wrapping it around a set of events that the council has set out that it wants to do and providing support for that means we've already got a reasonably clear idea of what it is we're trying to do, and this is why we're using the money to support that. But yes, in a nutshell, we're reducing grants which amount to about 85,000 a year over the past 2 or 3 years down to a pot of 25,000.
That's okay. Thank you for that question and explanation. I mean, it illustrates the difficulty, doesn't it? And those organisations are ones that we absolutely might want to support, would like to support, but the City Council is no longer in a place where we can support everything that we want, and I think particularly grants that are being funded from reserves is not a sustainable financial position, and that is what we have to move towards, is that the council lives within its means, and we, as an organisation, we can't afford to give grants to other organisations, some of which have their own substantial reserves. The complexity of this paper just illustrates how it's kind of grown like Topsy, isn't it? And Shane promised me this was the simplified version. So thank you for that. I mean, the only other one I wanted just to speak about, because for me, for us, is really, really important, is the discretionary welfare assistance scheme. I'm really proud that as a Labour group, this council does still have that scheme, and we've managed to protect it from previous budget cuts. And just looking at the table in paragraph 6.6 just illustrates the scale of need and the importance of this scheme. So my understanding is that what we're talking about is having the same amount within the scheme, but looking for it to be partly funded via the household support grant, because I absolutely would not agree to any reduction in the level of help that our citizens need, because it is just so important in the life of our city. Nice to do's, but some of these are for people that are absolutely on the breadline and beyond. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just to confirm that is the case.
Sorry, any further questions? Comment, David?
I just want to pick up on the point that Shane has answered with regard to the grants, one-off grants from reserves, and Lynn and Adrian have made the point as well. I think I just want to add really that we might be in a position where we can consider these in the future, but we've got to get back to a position where we're making a surplus in order to do some of these things. You know, as long as we are continuing to balance the books from our reserves, it will be very difficult for officers to recommend to members that we should accelerate that depletion by giving grants from reserves. So it just highlights for me the importance of the review we're going through now, in order to get back to not only, dare I say, a balanced budget, but a position where some of the reserves we've been using over the last couple of years that were set aside for good reason, which have now been depleted, we look to start to rebalance as well. You know, we can do this, but I think we need to do that first in terms of priority. Thank you.
Jesse.
I just have a very quick question. With regards to the 25,000 in corporate events for the first come, first serve grants, I wonder, is there any chance that some of those grants could become loans instead? So 0% loans, that if the event is successful and people, for-profit organizations, make money because of that support, then they give it back.
Through you, Chair, I would advise that if we were going to be using loans rather than grants, then we would go through a separate process to that. So keep the £25,000 for grants. The reason being is that giving loans to third parties, there are a number of rules in terms of financial regulations around that, which need quite a lot of consideration before we agree to do it. So welcome the suggestion and the idea. We have looked at loans. There is part within our commercial strategy and our income generation strategy which covers those facilities of making loans to third parties. We'll continue to do that, but I would recommend that we didn't do it as part of that 25,000.
Many thanks. I'm not seeing any more hands. So, I mean, just from my perspective, having listened to the conversation around the table, I mean, there is nothing we do that doesn't have value. If we are in a position to afford it, we would do it. Everyone, those people who are, we're talking about essentially people here, are in most cases extremely vulnerable and need help. Nevertheless, we live in challenging times, and so long as those people who are the most vulnerable get the help they need, as we take each thing up the inverted pyramid, so to speak, we've got to be critical. You know, we've got to be very conscious of the fact that savings have to be made. We simply cannot live without outside of our means, because that is a road to ruin. So I'm going to take the recommendations. I'll take them individually, and I'll ask for the usual show of assent or otherwise. So 1.1 is to reduce the level of grants to third parties from 605,980 by 59,430 from 24/5, and by 113,320 over the remaining life of the current city plan as part of the MTFP cost reduction exercise. Please show if you agree. Thank you. Any against? Not seeing any. Thank you. To place current grant funding to Worcester Theatres and Lippard Grange Hub on the same basis as Worcester Community Trust to support access to services through use of the council's own assets. Those in agreement, please. Thank you. To change the existing process for managing small grants to a call-in period and incorporate a system for assessing applications. Those in agreement, please. That's everyone. Thank you. to pause grant funding from reserves once existing commitments have been met, and show agreement, please, if you do. Not against, thank you. And to publish an annual events programme and to make available an annual budget allowance of £25,000 to make in-year applications compatible with the programme as they arise. Those in agreement? Thanks very much. Against? No. Abstentions? Adrian. Okay, at that point we move to agenda item 10, Q4 financial monitoring report. Is it Mark?
It is. However, Mark's got a train to catch at 10 to 10, so I'm going to suggest to take some stress out of his life. He heads off to the station and I'll do the report.
Yeah.
If you have any tricky questions, we can give you a ring in the morning, okay?
Okay.
So this is our financial, none of that was public. This is our financial report. So this is the outturn report for last year, which is good to note that for those who cast their memories back to Q3, we were projecting at that stage a deficit of 1.1 million, and that has now been reduced to a deficit of around 430,000, which is a much improved position over what it was. It is nonetheless a deficit, and if you turn your attention to page 66, the chart under paragraph 4.1, you can see how that compares with other years. Obviously, the 2021 was very anomalous in terms of the COVID grants and so on that we received that year, which changed the picture. But in all other years, we've followed a similar pattern. It was in this year in particular, in 22-23, which is the blue line, the one at the bottom, which shows that we were in a position of significant concern as we got to Q3. As we then progressed, the settlement that came through and the additional elements of income put us in a much better position than we'd anticipated being. So it is a positive outturn in the sense that it's better than we thought it was going to be, but it's still nonetheless one that gives us concern that spend against actual budgeted spend is a problem. There are a lot of details in the report about the reasons for those variances. I won't go through them. The headline for us is that is the deficit which I've just mentioned. The other things that we need to do is note the change to the capital programme, which is in section 5, which shows a certain amount of slippage against the programme, which we just need to make sure that members are appraised of that and recognising that a lot of that work is going to follow through into the following year. And I'd also need to request that we agree the write-offs, which are at paragraph 8.2. Just to note at this point that council tax and NNDR recovery during the year wasn't as good as we'd normally anticipate it would be. And we've been in a long period when we've been had in abeyance our normal recovery processes. So we're going to be, those are now coming back into force, so we should see that starting to recover. But that probably means that we're seeing an increase in potential write-offs as people start to address the fact that there is significant a build-up of debt over some time. So that may become a pressure for us in the future. And lastly, in terms of paragraph 9, the benefit of that better surplus position than we'd expected is that we have more left in uncommitted reserves than was previously anticipated. So going back to the previous report, which showed that we potentially have some £500,000 in costs of meeting voluntary redundancies. We now have sufficient reserves left in our business rate risk reserves, which is at 9.3, which shows us 1.225 million. We have enough in there to meet those costs without having to look at any of our existing previous decisions, and I really make reserves before doing those. So those are the key points which have emerged from the Q4 report. If there are very quick questions that Mark can answer, we'll be happy to answer them. But otherwise, if members want to approach me about any details, then I'll be happy to come back with a more detailed response if I'm not able to answer it tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Any questions or comment now? Please, none that I'm seeing. So, agenda item 11, Q1 Financial Monitoring Report 23-4.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you need to know the recommendation?
I do beg your pardon, yes, we do indeed. Yeah, my fault. Right, if you just momentarily return back to agenda item 10, and if we can take 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3, Adrian, then Lynn.
It was a quick clarification, 9.2, Shane.
Yeah.
They're all in brackets. Does that mean those are things we've not spent, or there are those are the surpluses from those spends?
Those are that is spent from those reserves. So those in brackets are spend out of those reserves.
Out of the reserves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lynn, did you want to make a point? No, thank you. Right, so as I say, we'll take 1.1, the noting, 1.2, the approval of the write-offs of council tax and business rates, and 1.3, agreeing the balances on earmarked reserves at 31st March 2023. Show your assent, please, if you would, or otherwise. I think that's unanimous. Yes, so thank you. Okay. Returning to agenda item 11, Q1 Financial Monitoring Report 23-4.
Thank you, Chair. This is just the first monitoring report of the year. Our forecast year-end performance at Q1 is very surplus of 188,000. I've been able to say that for quite a while. Bear in mind, though, that surplus includes the repurposing of reserves transferred into the general fund. So it's not a surplus, it's just we'll have to transfer less from reserves into the general fund to achieve a zero balance at the end of the year. Okay, so it's not extra money that can be spent, but we will look to continue to improve that. And I think it is a very early indication that some of the progress that we've been making, so for instance, holding vacancies and ensuring that we're trying to be as efficient as possible in our spending on supplies and services, are beginning to show, you could see that as an early sign of improvement. It's worth noting that there are some significant risks which may come along. For instance, 3.5 pay award, where we have a budget assumed an increase of 5%. At the moment, those pay award hasn't been concluded. I think the current latest estimate is it will be slightly higher than that 5%. Well, last year it was 7.5%, so I think it probably be something similar. So that would reduce our 188 deficit straight away, surplus rather straight away. And again, gas and electricity costs, diesel costs are still fairly variable, so there is quite a bit of room for development there, which might change that. The other significant part of our budget, which will be a problem again, paragraph 3.77, is this complex area of housing benefit subsidy, which is essentially the costs of keeping people in accommodation, temporary accommodation, and we don't get full subsidy recovery on that. And we don't budget for it because we attempt to deal with that in year, and every year so far we've been able to more or less do that. But there is this significant variance to budget which will come through that. So if we can address that, then we might well be in a better position than we are at the moment. So it's a fairly optimistic position at the moment, but it's only the first quarter. There's a long way to go through the year. So we'll continue to keep you appraised of progress as the year progresses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Questions or comment, please? Lynn.
I mean, first to say thank you to officers, for the report and for the position. I know there's an enormous amount of work that's gone into this across all our services to achieve this position. And it's kind of really pleasing to see that the income measures, a number of the income streams are doing well. So the forecast income from car parks is now kind of post-COVID recovered and has increased. I'm interested in the income from PCNs, from that kind of gives the lie to all our residents that say, but you don't do any enforcement. We clearly are doing some because we're getting the money from the parking tickets. And the other one I think that for me is sort of particularly pleasing as an income is trade waste, and that absolutely is a success story, and it's a success for our in-house services, and what, you know, what we offer and what we can do. And you know, a little plug, if there's any other businesses out there that are not, you know, that have got a trade waste contract with other companies, that they absolutely should look to come to us and support their local council. So yeah, well done to everybody there. I know there's a huge amount of work behind these figures and graphs.
Okay, any further questions or comment? None that I'm seeing. So to the recommendation, I'll just read them out and I'll ask for your assent, please. That the committee reviews the financial monitoring details, including budget variances, performance indicators for the first quarter ended 30th of June 2023, and that the committee approves the write-offs of council tax and business rates for the quarter. Those in agreement, show of hands, please. Thank you very much. We will move to agenda item 12, a proposal to amend fees and charges, bereavement services. Lloyd?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll be as quick as I possibly can. So this committee has responsibility for considering in-year amendments to fees and charges. And what we're asking members to do this evening is to consider an amendment to the cremation-only non-attendance fee within bereavement services. So this is a type of service that provides a less expensive type of funeral service. They increased in popularity following some work that was done nationally with funeral undertakers and getting them to be more transparent around the costs that they charge. And it also was sort of almost forced upon many families through COVID in having to deal with and manage funerals differently, and some of that behaviour has stuck. We've provided that service for a few years, and we've always increased charges in line with inflation, and that's come through the relevant committees. But more recently, a neighbouring crematorium has reduced their charge significantly. And what that's had the impact of doing is reducing demand for that service within Astwood. So the disappointing thing there is obviously there's a loss of demand, but equally the service, and if Doug was here, he would echo this, is that we're very conscious that, you know, when families are looking to hold funerals for loved ones, geography is really, really important. If there's Worcester connection, you know, it's important that people, you know, have that Worcester connection right to the end. And sadly for us, there are services that are driving past Astwood and going elsewhere. So Doug has worked with funeral directors to look at how that demand can be recovered, how we can better support Worcester families and the Worcester community with that less costly funeral option. And has developed a fee proposal that's in front of you this evening to reduce that fee from £529 to £350. And we are very confident that we will be able to make up the difference there. So financially, the cost of the service would still be fully covered. So the risk around income loss is low. So, Chair, conscious of time, that probably covers the basics, and happy to take any questions.
Questions? Stephen, please.
I've got one quick one. When the crematorium gets replaced with the new burners and that, what will happen to this service? Because obviously we'll have to cremate an outside one, and will we still be charging £350?
When we bring the mitigation plan back as part of the future report on this subject, then we will cover items like that off. But one of the things that we committed to is we will try everything we possibly can to continue to provide the service that we possibly can, even though some of those elements will be off-site. If that needs a review of prices, that's what we'll do.
No. So to the recommendation, and approves an amendment to the Worcester City Council fees and charges 23.4 by applying a reduced fee of £350 for cremation only non-attendance with immediate effect. If you're in agreement, please show. There we are. I think so. Yes. To agenda item 13, Treasury Management Annual Report. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. These reports are part of statutory requirement to report back to you in terms of our activity with regard to borrowing. You'd be delighted to know we're not one of those councils which has spent a lot of time borrowing a lot of money and getting into financial difficulty. And what's interesting is table 3, where have I put it? Table 3, the borrowing position is the important one. So our borrowing movement between 31st of the 3rd, 22 and 31st of the 3rd, 23 has gone down. So we've got less borrowing. We repaid some of our borrowing and have not increased it. So our borrowing position has improved, which is good news. And the other thing that you should pay attention to are those indicators set out at paragraph 7 or section 7. And what we're looking to do is, at the beginning of the year, we set targets or give you assurance that we're going to do things which increase our security over our capital, our liquidity, which means that we've got enough money to meet short-term debts and so on, and our interest rate exposures, which means that we're not getting into dodgy deals in terms of our lending arrangements and so on. The important point is in the right-hand column, have we complied with our proposals? And the answer in every case is yes, we have. So you are assured that we're not doing anything unusual or strange or out of agreement in terms of our treasury management practices. That's the purpose of the report, and I hope members go away assured by it. Thank you.
Many thanks. Any questions or comment to that report? None that I'm seeing. So the recommendation 1.1 is that we note the details contained within and that the annual report is referred to full council for information. Please, would you just show that you've noted that and agreed to that, please? Okay, it's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, we move to agenda item 14. Is this yours, Rich? Okay, so between the pair of you, please do.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to enthuse you all at this late hour with the Year 2 update on the Council's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy. Many of you will know Rich Morris, who's been working with me closely on the strategy. Rich has got some hard copies of the strategy. You've all been given one in your pigeonhole, but if you want another one tonight, please do take it away. So it's been over a year since we've had the strategy in place. Just to recap, that following a self-assessment process, the Council was able to benchmark itself as good, but not excellent. And the way the strategy is laid out, which hopefully you're familiar with, the middle of the document is a series of descriptions of why we can say we're good and the specific steps that we would take to say we would be excellent. So if you like, it's an action plan within a strategy. I was reassured to see an article recently in the Municipal Journal, which I shared with Robin as our EDI member champion, which made the same point about taking a whole systems approach and a series of step-by-step actions. What I'm not going to do tonight is reel off a list, because I don't suspect that that's helpful for a variety of reasons, but clearly there is an amount of reporting in that is now going on EDI that we didn't have until we had the strategy. So there are definitely eyes on this now and eyes on our actions. What we wanted to do briefly was just take this in 2 parts. I just wanted to reflect on what we're finding easy to implement and what we're finding challenging. So, you know, kind of overall reflection. And then Rich was going to introduce the census data set that we've provided in your Appendix 1, State of the City. And no doubt you'll want to take that away and read that. And we think you might want a bit of a member workshop or seminar briefing on that. So just in terms of what's been easy to do, I mean, we've been able to continue to harness lots of ideas, lots of creativity. Staff initiative has continued to be excellent. Councillors raising lots of good points. There's lots of people thinking and throwing things into the mix, which is great. And so there's definitely a conversation going on within the council. It's also been easy to join in with existing national initiatives where we can find them. And I'll come on to that point in a minute. So where there are national initiatives, it's lined up with what we're trying to do under our strategy. And we are doing this with no additional dedicated resource. And I think that is rational, both in the financial situation that we find ourselves in, but also if this is supposed to be just embedded behaviour and how we all think, there's no point setting this aside in the council, because we'll continue to work in silos if we do that. So those aspects have gone well, and we found it easy to identify policies that we can make more inclusive, and we found good support for that. But where it's been difficult is there's a leadership question really about the council's duty under the Equality Act and how far that goes. And there's been quite a lot of scenarios in which we've had to replay the sort of council as the body corporate, which is not itself a politically activist organisation. There are politicians who comprise it, but the council as a corporate entity applying taxpayers' funding to its powers and duties must maintain the legal framework and promote the legal framework. And there is many arguments for and against that, but that is where we are. So that's I hope that's not too oblique, but that is a challenge about how you show leadership while still staying within that corporate function. There was a very low response rate from partner organisations to the launch of our EDI strategies, very, very low in terms of physical comms, the new email account, very low response. We've clearly got more to do on that, but that's notable. Lack of nationally recognised settled benchmarks and blueprints is something we're exploring a lot through the EDI staff working group. It's very hard to find a consensus about what good looks like. And if you take something like accessibility and then you drill down into a particular, for example, a sensory impairment, you will find different national charities disagreeing about a standard. So there's a lot of debate, which is really healthy. This is definitely, as we said when we launched a strategy, an ongoing conversation, but things aren't that fixed and it's quite hard to reach for standards. And that's been true in terms of urban design as well. And we briefly mentioned that yesterday. And local authority EDI leadership as well. It's been hard to identify the kind of best in show. Clearly lots of people are doing lots of great things. So there's an awful lot of good practice out there, but it is all hugely variable, and there is a lot of balancing of all the different protected characteristics and things to think about. There's a lot of work to do, whichever way you look, and I think we recognise that. And as Robin said to me recently, you know, clearly when we get to excellent, we've got to just carry on being excellent. It's going to take quite a long time. So, and that's part of this ebb and flow of all the debates that go on. But at one point I do want to hone in on tonight is this point about systematic approach to using demographic data, because some of you will remember that the council scored very low on that, particularly at a management level. So, you know, the managers using that information ourselves to inform the decisions that come through to you, and members being able to say that you've had the data and you've used it to inform your decisions. But it really had come out at that management level, and I think that's an area where we have struggled to make progress and get that kind of embedded systems thinking, with some exceptions. And clearly there was a presentation from Museums Lead last night, and it's very clear there that, and we've heard that in the officer working group, they spend a long time thinking about who their audiences are and whether they're reaching all of their audiences. So I don't want you to have the impression that there's none of it going on, but it's still localized as opposed to systematic, I would say. So just to sort of zip through this then. So clearly what the report doesn't do is list everything we're doing. It lists the things that we're doing this year, that we've done this year, that we hadn't done in previous years. So all the things that had taken us to good aren't repeated here. This is the stuff we've done in the year that's under our belt. I won't read that out. You can read that for yourself, but it's arranged under the 4 LGA principles. So again, if you do want to cross-reference to the strategy, you'll see the 4 pages in the middle of the strategy that address each of those principles. Some of them are complete, some of them are ongoing, and so forth, and they are rapidly replaced by other actions. So for example, on policies, we're looking at sickness and dignity at work. Next, in relation to translation and use of languages, we're looking at how we get that information out into operational services. You know, what I just would say with some regret is that we had the Local Government Association offering to give us support on a peer-to-peer counselling training session that you may have known because you've got a placeholder in your diaries. And on Friday, they emailed out of the blue and said they don't provide that service anymore due to funding, out of the blue. So we're not quite back to square one because we've got some leads to follow up, but it just goes back to the point about, you know, there's just so much to maintain. You've just got to keep plugging away, and we just try and do one thing every day, don't we? And meet on it every week and just keep moving things along. Okay, so that's a quick rattle. I'm sorry about the sort of the speed, but I'm just conscious of your time. what we're saying at the back of the report is there are two appendices. Perhaps if I may just cover them the other way around. There's a late appendix, which is your appendix 2, which was to acknowledge the fact that the government have just started a consultation on a disability action plan. And it was timely to get it in here, again, for further reading if you want to have a look. They are asking for everyone's views. They do refer to local authorities, but they're asking for everyone's views on what changes might be made to national policy or ways of working that would help with reducing disabling barriers. But when you read through the detail, there doesn't appear to be any funding attached. But there is a really open question at the end of what else could we do that would really help. So obviously we can put the F word in there. And I mean, an example of what was really helpful working at a national level was the Changing Places programme, because it's very specific and very niche. And the government arranged the funding stream and the consultants and got our projects organised. And so I think that was a very effective marshalling. I was really pleased to see on there, it's coincidental, but reference to accessible play. And they're asking whether they should make accessible play mandatory, some mandatory standards. So it's really good. There's some important things in there. I'm not decrying the value of the consultation, but there's quite a lot of setting up information hubs and signposting and phrases like that. So we've got to give it our all in terms of how we reply. I'm asking for delegated authority to work with chair and vice chairs to submit a response. So finally, the census data. What you'll know is that we did a little taster of this at Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee with the early data sets. You'll probably also know that the ONS have been a bit slow. Well, that's terrible. I'm sure it's been a big job, but they've been slower than expected to release the data sets. So, you know, we're now in a position where we have all the data sets for Worcester at the Worcester City level. We can drill down at ward level. The ONS are saying they will provide themselves more data at parish level and so forth, but that's not available yet. So we've called that a State of the City report. And Rich has compiled this fantastic report for you in Appendix 1 that sets out statistics and trends information across protected characteristics and other things that were collected in the census, which aren't technically EDI characteristics, but they're no doubt extremely of interest to you in terms of understanding our audience and the demography of the city. So in terms of, as I say, one of our improvement actions using data to inform service planning, this is clearly a tool now for managers as well. So we've talked with the leadership team about turning this into a training program and doing a staff briefing about it and making sure that everyone has sat through the experience of thinking about who's in the city. So we're just getting that embedded. We thought members might like some sort of online seminar, sort of navigating through the data, you know, and arguably we could use the slot that's vacated from the EDI training, because I doubt we're going to, if you've got that as a placeholder in your diary for mid-September, I doubt we're going to have another provider lined up by mid-September. So, you know, that's a thought on the hoof. So there we are. So Rich is here as well if you want to ask any questions about Appendix 1 or give us any general comments. So yes, very happy, and also always happy to have the conversation separately about where we're going in terms of the staff working group and all the actions that we've got in train.
Great, thank you, Sian. Any questions or comment to either paper, please? Tom.
Thank you very much. This is an excellent report. I just regret that we are talking about this towards the end of our very busy and long meeting. And the reason I say this is that our approach to embedding equality, diversity, inclusion in this council shapes us as an organization, shapes our culture. So if we can come up with some kind of engagement for the officers and also for the members, that would be, I think, very welcome. This is a great. I'm talking about the ONS census report. This is an excellent snapshot and an overview. But one thing which I think would be useful in the next edition of it, if we are to receive something similar, or perhaps if we are to focus on this in some kind of workshop scenario, is where are we as a council in relation to those demographics? So, for instance, when it comes to our leadership, I'm very proud to say that the Green Party, in terms of the gender equality, we are right bang in the middle. So we are reflecting the sort of 50-50 split when it comes to men and women. I know voters have something to say about this, but what I would like to suggest is sort of understanding of where we are and what our ambition is and how we're going to get there when it comes to mirroring what the local demographic is telling us. So that's one quick suggestion. In terms of the question, I think in among the things which the report highlights as a difficulty in terms of looking for the best practice, can I suggest that we think outside of the box in the sense that there's lots and lots of schemes out there, starting with Stonewall investing in ethnicity. They cost relatively little money, and they provide an excellent framework to measure ourselves and our organizational culture, not only against other local authorities, but also against other organizations in different sectors, private and public. And I think this is it. I was amused to find out that one of the languages I speak is the second most popular in Worcester. That's a lie, I knew that. So other than that, really great work, thank you.
Thank you. Lynn.
Huge thank you to officers for this report. You're right, it is a pity that it's so late in the evening and we've got such an enormous agenda today, but you know, officers have done an absolutely brilliant job of embracing the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy and delivering these actions. You know, the table that we've got on page 133, it just shows what a long night it is absolutely fabulous. You know, what's been delivered there just, you know, reflects what this council is about and our communities and recognising and celebrating those communities. So yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yes, I think the census data, it would be good to have a workshop, and then there's no opportunity to drill down into it and to sort of digest it and for all members to participate. With regard to the government strategy and consultation, I just thought as I'm looking at this, is it appropriate maybe to come to Healthy Worcester meeting where we've got a network of sort of health organisations and stakeholders in the city, and the next meeting's the 28th of September, so you can just about sneak it in time, or if, you know, as a council we've got a draft response or something to, you know, to synthesize it together. So if, you know, if Richie's able to come to that, then, you know, I can put it on that agenda. Thank you.
Adrian.
Some time ago, we used to get ward profiles from the NHS, I think it was on a quarterly basis. And I just wondered, I can't remember well, they came from the NHS, didn't they, I think, but whether they still do that or whatever, but it would be a really useful thing to match with this detail, to sort of pull the two together.
Yes, the JSNA still exists, and that does go down to ward level, and some of the data on the ONS goes to ward level as well. But if I can have a session with members, I can show you how to collect some of that data, because not all of it's appropriate and not all of it's at ward level. So we just need to have a bit of a more informal session with everybody just to go through that and then decide what we want to get out of it.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying that that would be one of the objectives of the workshop, is to then say where next, because some people might like to sort of browse around on the ONS tools and drill in, and other people might say, I've got other things I want to do, but I'd like you just to give me this data, you know, and I think then we might get a flavour of what's going to be useful. As Rich has been saying when we've been talking to managers about this, again, just because we're a small council, we don't have an observatory team who can just spend the time pulling out the info. There's going to be a bit of self-help with managers about, so it's different with members, but with managers showing where to go and drill in, what they need to look for. But Rich has been working with particular managers to signpost things like languages in wards and things like that. So we can agree perhaps what the priorities are collectively that will inform decision making, and then we can have a practice on that, can't we, in the year, and see how much we've used that data to inform service planning. If I give you a local example on Play, I asked Rich whilst we were doing the firming up the strategy, just a little demographic snapshot of children and young people in each ward, you know, so, and understanding that, it's a very superficial way just to ask, but it confirmed the theory that they're everywhere. So
I've got Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just comment on the excellent work the council officers and members have been doing around this policy, and especially leading from my colleague here to the right, Robin, in terms of actually embedding this in our thoughts and in our processes and in our policies throughout the life of it since we've been working on the programme. And I think the testimony is that actually we do now have a real culture of progressive openness, transparency, and a real desire to achieve that change. And that testimony to that is actually some of the conversations that we are having around these tables and making sure that we are reflective of this policy every time we make certain decisions. And the other highlight actually is that actually, certainly in my opinion, that members feel able to challenge other members as well, and to stand up against bigotry and against you know, speech which isn't conducive of bringing communities together and what our values stand for within this council. And I only feel that that is possible when policy like this is embedded within our culture, and that actually members will be protected and whistleblowers will be protected when they can speak up for that. As long as we can back that up through our systems and our processes, then I feel we are making real great progress.
Comment. Robin?
I'll try and be quick, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers for making my job easy for the last 12, 13 months or so as your EDI champion. And I'm grateful for this report, the State of the City report. I wish I'd had some access to some of the graphics used in it for my report. And of course, yeah, I will certainly be taking up the offer of a briefing about St. John's. It's something I'm fascinated by. So thank you. I think just gratitude.
Thanks very much. Any further questions or comment? In that case, we can go first of all to the recommendations on the sort of the original paper, both noting exercises. Please show. Thanks very much. And to the supplementary paper, that the committee delegates authority to the corporate director in consultation with chair and vice chairs to submit a response to the government's consultation on a disability action plan. Please indicate in agreement. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Rich. Okay. Can we move, please, to agenda item 15, Q1 performance report?
Thank you, Chair. This is a Q1 report, so it's very early in the year, so I will give a more fuller update at Q2 when we can have a look at it in more detail. Only one I'd refer to, which is the city centre transport strategy, which would normally come here, but has went to the PED committee last night because there was a lot of focus there on air quality, which was in the remit of that committee. So just to reassure you that in future, that strategy and work in relation to it will be coming here at future meetings. Otherwise, if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Any questions to the report, please? Lynn.
Sorry, I do hesitate in light of the hour, the time we're at. Just a couple of comments, if I may. So around projects, Future High Streets Fund Performance Arts Centre. I mean, in light of the earlier agenda item, I'm not really sure that we should be putting this as a green project. I'm not sure what the criteria is, but I would challenge that. And then the Towns Fund Community Skills looks like a really good piece of work. If it is a P&R committee project, can I ask that we actually have some information about it? Because as far as I'm aware, it's never come here for any kind of decision making or feedback, which, you know, it would be good to have. Yeah, so a plea for that, please.
Through you, Chair.
Yeah.
Certainly, I mean, each of the town's fund projects would devolve to the various committees to pick up. So they've been put into the forward plan for the committee. So we'll be receiving a detailed report on that at some stage. So yes, so we can bring that forward if that's of local interest. Thank you. And yes, we will revise and review the future High Streets Fund Green Triangle future meetings.
Tom.
Only a very brief observation on page 172, when we discuss mandatory training for officers, can I suggest we consider including EDI training or unconscious bias training, or the combination of both? I think if we are serious about embedding and changing culture, I think we should be looking into this. Thank you.
Can I just comment that, I mean, certainly I'd welcome a policy change that certain training was mandatory. That would be a policy change for the council because that hasn't been mandatory before at this council. So I think I would just take your views, Chair, about whether you're happy to just take that now or whether you want us to just set out the training, bring that back, and you can say what you want, mandatory or not. I mean, I'd absolutely welcome that, but the policy in Worcester for many years has been mandatory is only planning and licensing. So I'm not attempting to defend the status quo, but I think from a governance point of view, I just need to let you know that, and it may just be a little bit late to do that on the hop. There may be other things. You recall from PNGP the other night how, and Councillor Cochrane will recall how we felt about safeguarding. So, you know, as in mandatory training, etc. So it could be that you perhaps just should see a menu, and so I'm just airing that, because whilst I very much welcome the suggestion, it would be a change for the council.
I'd agree. In principle, fine. I think it ought to be taken away and worked through properly, though, if that's, you know, I think that would be my thoughts on this. But in principle, absolutely fine. Okay.
Great, and I mean, that can go to Audit and Governance Committee if that's acceptable, Chair.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes. So any further comment? Tom, brief, please.
Just a very, very quick clarification. I was talking about mandatory training for officers rather than members. That's okay. So page 172, and it would make sense if you look at this.
Sorry, forgive me. Yes, mandatory training for officers. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Stephen, again, briefly, please.
Yeah, 169, the customer feedback response. This is almost comical. This is where it's like a 0.01% response rate. Isn't it the fact that every time you buy something, every time you do something, there has to be some pointless email comes back to you saying, oh, you know, what was your satisfaction with this sort of thing? And isn't it not a representation that people are just fed up with receiving these sort of pointless things? And I know the data from the 36 is probably interesting, but do we need to find a better way of tracking that information?
Through you, Chair. We have, you know, over a long period now tried to find new ways in ensuring that we get feedback from customers. This one in relation to those devices where you're simply walking out of the building and you can press whether you liked it or not, or the service that you received. So it should be relatively straightforward and easy to do. And we will continue to try and find ways to do it. I mean, we've developed a stakeholder and customer strategy, which is all about trying to develop a conversation with our customers as opposed to just a sort of two-way information feedback approach. And this forms part of that. It's part of an ongoing discussion. So I welcome that idea, Stephen. We'll look into it. Definitely.
You, Jessie.
Just briefly, I wonder if there is any possibility for customer feedback or a process to be in place when somebody books an event, a high-value event, to have a person at the end of the event they can speak to straight after, particularly if it's an event that brings a lot of revenue to the city in case something has gone wrong and things can be addressed right away. I think it's sometimes with a new client, it might be too late to send an email or a phone call later on. Nothing beats having a person on site just to make sure that the client is happy.
No further questions or comment. I take it we're all happy to note the report. Thank you. Agenda item 16, appointments to outside bodies. Sharon?
Chair, you'll recall the last time we did this, it had a flavour of Eurovision. It's
Indeed.
a shorter lineup tonight. Members will remember that a few appointments were carried over because we either sought clarification about the nature of the appointment that was being made, or we were going to just approach individuals again and see if we could fill the vacancies. So the ones that are coming forward for appointment tonight are Age UK, Herefordshire and Worcester, Cranston, Disability Sport Worcester, Disablement Information Advice Line, Patrol Adjudication Joint Committee, Shop Mobility Management Committee, South Worcestershire Development Plan Joint Advisory Panel, Worcester Consolidated Municipal Charities and Worcester Six Board. And Chair, we have had nominations through the good offices of Democratic Services as the days have gone by and group leaders have been in touch. So shall I just start by reading out the nominations we've had for each one and just pause when we get to the need for a vote?
Please do.
Okay, so Age UK, Herefordshire and Worcester, one vacancy, one nomination, and that's Sunil Desera. I should have said, shall we vote on them as we go through? That's helpful, isn't it? Yeah, just show of hands. Yeah. Great. The next one is Cranston, and we've had no nominations for that. The next one is Disability Sport Worcester. There's one vacancy. It's a vacancy for one representative plus an alternate. We've had one nomination, and that's Hannah Cooper. Okay. Great. Disablement Advice Line, vacancy for one representative following the resignation of Claire Badsey, who I think was appointed previously. No nominations for that. Patrol Adjudication Joint Committee, vacancy for one representative following the death of Councillor Simon Cronin. There are no nominations for that either. Shop Mobility, again, vacancy following the resignation of Claire Badsey. No nominations for that. South Worcestershire Development Plan, there are 2 representative spaces left on the Worcester allocation. You'll recall we have 5 slots and we have 3 nominations, Robin Norfolk, Owen Cleary and Andrew Cross. There is a degree of protocol around chair and vice chair of PED ordinarily sitting on it, but that isn't enshrined in our constitution. So we have 3 people willing to serve on JAP for the 2 seats. Julian, remind me how we did this last time.
Yeah, how we dealt this last time is we went round the table and asked members individually to name 2 from the 3 nominations. It was a little bit different because it's 2 from 3 as opposed to 1 from 2, but I can't think of a better way to do it, particularly this time of night. So if we're happy to proceed, go around the table and do that, and I'll make a note of the names that are shouted out by each of you, and hopefully I'll get the right total at the end.
Thank you very much. Councillor Denham? 3 names, Robin Norfolk, Owen Cleary, Andrew Cross.
Thank you. Robin Norfolk and Owen Cleary.
Robin Norfolk.
You're only making 1 nomination.
Robin Norfolk.
Myself and Owen Cleary.
Robin Norfolk and Andrew Close.
Robin Norfolk and Andrew Cross.
Robin Norfolk and Owen Cleary.
Robin Norfolk and Andrew Cross.
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 Okay, so the two with most votes, Robin Norfolk and Andrew Cross.
Thank you, Chair. So the next appointment is Worcester Consolidated Municipal Charities. We have one vacancy following the resignation of Jenny Barnes. This does not have to be filled by a councillor, but it was deferred last time because there was that query to be resolved. The names put forward are Jill Desera and Alan Tidy. So I'm afraid we're going to do the vote again. Councillor Denham?
I can help a little bit. Alan has served on this charity previously. He did so for, I think, approximately 12 months, but he wasn't successful with his nomination back in May. He is the St. Peter's Parish Councillor, and as I've said, he has had some experience sitting on the charity as a council representative in the past.
I vote for Jill.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Alan Tidy.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Councillor Jill Desera.
Okay, so it's Jill Desera who's your appointee.
Thank you, Chair. Last one, Worcester 6 Board, a new appointment, and we have one nomination, and that's Councillor Robin Norfolk. So we may put that to the vote.
There is no any other business to my knowledge. We do have another piece of business, but can I just gather your assent to us going what I imagine will be a brief closed session? Okay, thank you. Just 1 second while we